Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay.
You're
Okay, would everyone have a seat, please? Yes. Cuba. I had to think about it. Yeah. Okay, device is off. So how many people have had it?
Only 2 new ones. Oh, where's the motion?
You don't.
I've got the...
Okay, we're going to call the meeting to order. Everyone's ready? Welcome, everybody. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 4 and 5 on today's agenda. For the items listed above, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board if Council does not adopt an amendment within 120 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 180 days for an official plan amendment. A comment sheet is available at the door, and if you are wanting to speak and you haven't registered yet, you can go and sign up, and we'll be happy to hear from you today. Any declarations of interest, committee members? None? Confirmation of minutes of February the 10th. Any changes? Are they carried? Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go through the agenda and see if there's anything that we can carry on consent, and so therefore allow those interested in the audience to go back to their daily business. We are holding number 1, which is the designation of Broadview Public School. We do have speakers. Number 2 is the application to alter 110 Stanley Avenue, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Rockbrook Park Heritage Conservation District. Do we have any speakers on that? No, we do not. Does anyone on committee want to hold this item? Councillor Nussbaum?
I do not want to hold it, Chair, but I would note that that is a property in the New Edinburgh Heritage Conservation District, so just a technical
you are right.
amendment to that motion may be necessary.
And definitely. Okay, we'll take note of that. So that's in the New Edinburgh, but you're right, I didn't even notice that. Okay, so application to alter 110 Stanley Avenue property in the New Edinburgh Heritage Conservation District. Is that carried? Thank you. As amended, if I need to say that. The designation of St. Anne's Rectory under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Does anyone want to speak to that item? No, it's carried. Thank you. The zoning bylaw amendment, 3180 and 3196 Albion Road South, and a portion of 2059 Bank Street. We have one person to speak in support. Does anyone else want to speak to this item? Mr. White, if we are prepared to carry this item, are you prepared not to speak? Thank you. Is this item carried? Thank you. Oh, she wants to speak? Oh. So, taking a time out for a moment, we just have been handed from Nancy Miller-Chenier. Nancy? No, I can support. Okay, so you don't need to speak? Good, because we've already approved it. Oh, this is a fast committee. Okay, thank you very much. The next item is the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 443, 445, and 447 MacArthur Avenue. We do have speakers, so we'll hold that. Number 6 is the 2014 annual report pursuant to the Building Code Act. Does anyone want to hold that item, or is that carried? carried. Thank you. Okay, and number 7 is the settlement for Terry Fox Drive school site. Very happy to see this before us today. Are there any speakers? No, we have no speakers. Does anyone on committee want to hold it, or can we carry it? Carried. Thank you very much. Okay, number 8 is the license of occupation for Stormwater Pond 4. If you remember, this was a notice of motion in the last committee from Councillor Kadri. It's in his area. It's the Maple Grove Facility lands. Does anyone want to hold this item, or do we have any speakers, Chris? We have no speakers. Is it carried? Okay.
Carried, Madam Chair. Just one comment, though. We would like to deal with this at the council tomorrow.
And Councillor Tierney has got a motion to do that. And so we're carried on the item, the Stormwater Pond 4. And then Councillor Tierney, Vice Chair Tierney, did you want to move your motion?
Yeah, as Councillor Kadri mentions, this is just simply advancing this to the meeting of Wednesday, the 25th of February. I'll just read it here. That the Planning Committee approve that Council be requested to waive the rules of procedure to consider a report at this meeting of Wednesday, the 25th of February, in Planning Committee Report number 3, in order to permit construction of a stormwater pond to commence, to permit as much work as possible to be done before half-loads rules run into effect to accommodate the fall closings.
Is that carried? Thank you. Oh, and then our number 9 is the repurposing of cash in lieu. This was a notice of motion last committee meeting from Councillor Leeper, and that is to take some money that was set aside for cash in lieu of parking payment originally for streetscaping on Parkdale, and since that's not possible, to move that money for improvements to La Roche Park. Does anyone have any questions or want to hold that? Is it carried? Carried. Thank you very much. And then we'll be holding the last item, which is the 2015 draft operating and capital budget for a presentation. So we'll go back to the beginning, to Broadview School. Ms. Collins. Speakers.
Sorry?
The speakers on this. Here. So Ms. Collins, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Ms. Collins has a brief presentation for the committee. This was also an item, as Chair Nussbaum knows, for the Built Heritage Subcommittee, with extensive discussion at that time, and as per the requirements for the moving forward on Heritage Act applications. It's now before the Planning Committee. The recommendation of the Built Heritage Subcommittee was to approve of the designation, but it now needs to be reconfirmed by this committee before it moves to Council. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Collins to run through the presentation and the reasons for the recommendation to designate.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As Mr. Smith just said, this is a report recommending designation of Broadview Public School at 590 Broadview Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The property is located adjacent to Nepean High School, and together they form a large campus block in the Highland Park neighborhood at the corner of Broadview Avenue and Dovercourt Avenue. The school is a large L-shaped building. The portion of the building that is being looked at for designation is at the far north corner of the site. You can see in these photos, it is a small portion of the building that is being recommended for designation today, and it is only the exterior of the building that we are looking at. So the interior is not included in the proposed designation of the property. This is a historic photo of the building. It was constructed in 1927 after a fire destroyed the earlier school on this site, which was constructed in 1916. This photo is circa 1933, so shortly after the construction of the building. You can see in the background Nepean High School, which is adjacent to Broadview. This is a photo of the front facade of the building today. You can see that the front entrance has somewhat been altered and turned into a window, but otherwise the building remains largely intact in terms of its architectural style. It's an example of the collegiate Gothic style of architecture and is characterized by the red brick with stone accents, the symmetrical facade, the flat roof, and the two-story construction. The building has had several additions since its construction to accommodate increased enrollment in the community. You could see from the aerial photo it is a large L-shaped building. This is where the additions all connect to the original building. So the south facade of the building has somewhat been altered by the addition of this piece in 1947. This is the north facade of the building, which remains largely unchanged with the exception of that window. So if the other additions were demolished in the future, it could be restored based on the historic evidence. These are just some photos of the details. You can see, it's difficult to see with the lighting, but above the front door there is an entablature with the words public school on it, all of the cut stone detailing around the windows. The window units themselves have been replaced, but the openings remain the same. I'll leave it to the representatives from the school board to talk in detail about their proposal for the site, but just quickly, there is a new school proposed for the site facing onto Dovercourt Avenue. The process would be that the new school would be constructed. Once it is constructed, the students would move over from the existing school to the new building, and the old building would be demolished. I've just shown briefly an approximate location of the 1927 portion of the school in red on this site plan. So it is proposed for replacement with a surface parking lot. There are three pieces of legislation that provide us with direction in terms of heritage designation at the city. The first is the city's official plan, which states that properties of cultural heritage value will be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Secondly is the provincial policy statement, which states that significant built heritage resources and cultural landscapes will be conserved. And then finally, which is the piece of legislation that we're dealing with today, is Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, which gives municipalities the ability to designate properties of cultural heritage value under Part 4 of the Act. In order to be designated, a property must meet one of the three criterion in Ontario Regulation 0906. Ontario Regulation 0906 has the following criteria: design, physical value, associative or historical value, and contextual value. And I'll just briefly explain why the department has determined that this building meets all three of those criteria. The historic associative value of Broadview Public School is that it's associated with the development of public schools in Nepean Township and the development of Highland Park. It is the only remaining school constructed in school section number 2 of Nepean Township in the early 20th century, and it was designed by the local architectural firm of Richards and Abra, who were well known in Ottawa and around the Ottawa Valley for the construction of educational buildings, and were also the architects of Nepean High School, which is next door. The contextual value of the building is that Broadview and Nepean form a large educational campus that together are a landmark in the neighborhood and help define the early 20th century character of Highland Park. And then finally is the design value. The building is a good example of the collegiate Gothic style, which was popular for school construction in the early 20th century, inspired by the university campuses of Oxford and Cambridge in England. And as I mentioned, the features that are typical of the style include the use of red brick and limestone, its symmetrical facades, carved stone panels, and evenly spaced windows. In conclusion, the department recommends issuance of a notice of intention to designate under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act according to the Statement of Heritage Character attached as Document 6 to the staff report. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. We do have speakers to come forward on this item. Does anyone have any questions of staff before we do? No? Thank you. So I'm going to ask, our first speaker is the chair of the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, Ms. Seward. Are you here, Shirley? Yes. Well, there you are.
Actually, we both like to sit down, Madam Chair. Is that possible?
Yes, it is. And are you, sir, Mr. Carson? Michael Carson, he's the Chief Financial Officer. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. There we are. My name is Shirley Seward, as the chair said, and I'm chair of the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. As a public organization, the OCDSB recognizes the importance of preserving our built heritage. However, we are mindful of our mandate to educate our students within the context of fiscal realities within which we must operate. Difficult decisions have to be made, and for the right reasons. When we looked at Broadview to see what we could do to ensure that we served the entire area of Westboro, Glaybar, and Highland Park neighborhoods into the future, we carefully examined whether or not we could use the existing school building. We found that we couldn't financially or functionally work it into our plans for student space, and the province agreed with that and gave us funding for a new school. When the request to designate part of Broadview Public School as a heritage site was put forward, we indicated that we would respect any decision to understand, but wanted to understand the Built Heritage Committee's rationale for the designation. Our position has not changed, but we seek clarity on which attributes of the building were identified to support the recommendation for designation under the Ontario Heritage Act. When we attended last week's Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting, we heard a recommendation that appeared to be based more on our ownership of the building and our ability to maintain it, rather than a demonstration of the unique features or characteristics of the building. I would like to invite our OCDSB senior staff, CFO Mike Carson, to explain in detail our concerns in order to help shape your own recommendations to the Council. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. The OCDSB owns over 750 hectares of real estate across the city, 150 buildings. We truly do understand our role as a public body, our role as a custodian of these buildings and the history that exists and the history that we're creating when we maintain these properties for the benefit of all of the people of Ottawa. Wherever and whenever we felt that it was possible and prudent, we've done everything we can to preserve and enhance our buildings for our use today and for the years to come. As our chair indicated, however, our first mandate is to meet the needs of our current and future students. In the case of Broadview Public School, we knew that the facility required work. We looked long and hard at whether or not the existing building could be incorporated into the new construction, and we realized there was no business case that supported that. We also understood that we needed to be able to keep students in the existing school while new construction occurred. As the chair said, we attended at the Built Heritage Advisory Subcommittee with open minds to better understand the discussion of the tower, the issues around representative of unique examples of this form of architecture. And I need to say to you that we are while we understand the issues that have been raised by staff, We have what is probably a better example of the same style of architecture by the same architectural firm, built by the same Nepean School District immediately to the north in Nepean High School. So I don't believe it's a unique situation. Having said that, we are here to listen. We understand the city and our commitment to this preservation discussion. But we wanted to clear up some possible misconceptions, as there was much discussion at the previous committee meeting around future uses for the building and what the board could do to keep the building alive. I just have to reiterate, without sounding like we're whining, unlike the federal, provincial, and municipal governments, school boards in Ontario have no ability to levy taxes. Capital funding is granted 100% by the Ministry of Education, as is operating funding. Monies are earmarked for specific projects, and we have very little latitude within that funding to allocate funding for other purposes. We were provided capital funding, partly provided by the province, partly out of our own reserves from the sales of other properties, to rebuild 782 pupil spaces on the Broadview site. We've talked to the Ministry's Capital Programs branch, and we can confirm that if a decision had been made to occupy the tower with students, either permanently or even temporarily, the funding that we would receive would be reduced commensurate with the number of pupil places that would be in the tower. So I can reiterate for you, the OCDSB has no plans to use that tower for pupil accommodation. I also need to indicate to you that leaving the structure in place has its challenges for the OCDSB. It's been confirmed to us by the ministry, no operational funds are going to be forthcoming to renovate or maintain that tower. I know there has been discussion of renovating this structure economically, but I need to point out the challenges. Given the tower will have no independent servicing or mechanicals after the demolition of the rest of the building, it is simply not achievable to renovate this building inexpensively. We think that we would have to, if the building were designated and we were unable to demolish it, we think we'd have no choice but to look to disposition, either by sale or by lease. And neither of these options are very straightforward. We have over 2,000 children being served on that city block, and I think most of you are aware of the traffic issues that we face, and our goal in finding a user for that building would be to try to find one that was compatible with the safety of our kids and not increasing the congestion that already exists there. We are surely willing to look at innovative possibilities. We know that these partnerships, though, are hard to come by, especially when you're dealing with a building that's going to require investment from top to bottom. The OCDSB would like to reaffirm our willingness to work with the city to take a look at this, however, regardless of whether or not this building is designated. But we need to understand that what none of us want is for that building to sit vacant, boarded up, and eventually disappear to a state where we have to demolish it. So we'd like to reiterate what we said to the subcommittee. We wanted to hear more about the unique attributes of the tower. We've heard from some of staff. If part of the subcommittee's rationale was a belief that the board would be able to maintain that structure or make use of it itself, then I think we need to be able to say to you, we won't be able to do that. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you. We value our partnership with the City of Ottawa, and we are always willing to work with you and will continue to work with the city, regardless of designation or not, as we try to make sure we can serve our shared community and our 65,000 students across the district every single day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And certainly we appreciate all that you do with all of your schools, being the largest board and all across our city and all of our wards. Councillor Brockington?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to understand the financial implications on taxpayers for both decisions, whether we designate or not, just so it's clear in my mind. So if we designate it a heritage site, and if it's used for pupil spaces, what is the reduction in the grant or the monies that the province will provide you to rebuild the school? And part two would be if we designate and you don't use it for any type of education needs, what would the ongoing cost be just to keep that on the books? My understanding is there'll be no utilities, there'll be no heat, light, power, water, but you'll still have insurance. You'll still have to maintain a building before you dispose of that. Is there any estimate on those costs as well?
Chair, I understand the question. I want to reiterate. We have no plans to use that building for student accommodation too. That would require a total redesign of the project at this point, and the dollars just will not make sense for us. The cost to bring that up to an acceptable standard that would meet our needs for permanent accommodation for students is probably in excess of $5 million. And the grant change would not cover that. So that's the first part of it. The second piece is that should it be designated, the school board has no use for that building. The building, without a significant investment, will not have services. So we would move to mothball it to try to preserve its value. And this is all happening probably in the summer of 2017 once the new school is up and occupied, while we try to identify a potential investor or user of the site. Mothballing costs can be significant, depends on the neighborhood, depends on the damage that you incur.
And just thank you for the answer. And just to clarify through you, Madam Chair, the mandate of a school board does not include retaining school sites which are no longer needed for education purposes, for even community purposes. There may be short-term needs that a school board might be able to help a community out with in the short term, but the long-term mandate of a school board is not to get in the business of community use facility. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct, Councillor Brockington. And I would just add to that the city has made it very clear that if we were interested in using it for pupil spaces ourselves, we would lose 30% of our grant from the city, and they would not provide the $5 million to upgrade it. So it certainly isn't our mandate to keep that building because we know we cannot afford to use it ourselves. Thank you.
Just for clarification, you meant the province. Okay, thank you. Because I was getting very nervous there.
Did I say the city?
You're talking millions of dollars, and you said the city. So.
No, you're the good people.
Councillor Leeper, and then Councillor Cloutier, then Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Chair Seward and Mr. Carson. And I do appreciate the spirit of cooperation. Should this building be designated, it strikes me that one of the most obvious courses would be to dispose of the land in order to find a new use for it. And in my role as city councillor for this neighborhood, I think I'd want to make a significant contribution to ensuring that that happens. Just a couple of quick questions of clarification, I think. The first one is, when would the building be slated for demolishing under the current plan?
I'll answer generally, and then staff will give you the real answer. Generally, it would not be demolished until we completely rebuilt the new school.
Chair, I believe that this part of the building would not be slated for demolition until probably the summer of 2017. We need to get students into the school. We can begin some of the interior demolition of the part that is not under discussion. But I think we'd want to, although we haven't finalized that part of the construction schedule, we'd want to do that work when both of the schools are not occupied. So my estimate is beginning in that period of May, June, July of 2017.
Okay. The second question I have for you, and actually this may not fall into the category of clarification, have you done any preliminary estimates of what this building and land might be worth to a third-party purchaser?
Chair, we haven't. We have an obligation under the Education Act to dispose of it at fair market value, and all of you around the table are aware of how those discussions progress when you determine that fair market value. We have not begun those studies. It is, for us, an extremely difficult situation because of the actual impact it has on our ability to operate that site to serve 2,000 kids. So we have not entered into those studies yet.
Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Chair Seward, Mr. Carson, thank you for the service to our students and to our community. Is there standalone mechanical in the proposed designated part? HVAC, heating?
No, Chair. It's all serviced from the part that's being demolished.
Is there an estimate of the costs that would be incurred or would be saved if you are asked to only demolish up to the designated part? Is there a savings or an extra cost to that?
Chair, there will be a slight savings because you're not demolishing immediately some of the parts that are containing designated substances, and obviously there's less square footage that you're eliminating at this time. It will create some additional challenges for us in ongoing costs in terms of hoarding and making sure that the rest of the building remains safe. But there would be some short-term savings, obviously, on that demolition contract. We haven't attempted to quantify those yet, though.
Does anything prevent the board to begin exploring alternate uses for that designated part well before 2017? Can you start entertaining or looking for offers before students are vacated to the new building?
Our sense is that to find a like-minded client that would use the building in a way that kept 2,000 students safe would be very, very challenging. Not so much because of the cost of actually selling the building, but because of the investment that such a client would have to make to renovate the inside of the building. It is not a good building inside at the present time. So based on our experience with other properties, we would think that it would be very difficult to find a buyer. Maybe you'd be better at doing it than we would. Mike?
Chair, the only thing I'd add is our disposition of property is governed by one of the regulations to the Act, and we are required when we declare a building surplus and wish to dispose of it. The current regulation requires it to circulate it to public bodies, and then there's a priority list of who can respond. It starts with the publicly funded school boards. The City of Ottawa is, if not second on the list, probably third, maybe behind the universities and colleges. So that's the formal part of the process. It's not unheard of for us to have some informal discussions ahead of time. And as I've said earlier, we are quite prepared, designated or not. Obviously, we believe designation is not required, to begin having those discussions sooner rather than later. But we need to make sure it's a deal that works for us as well as everyone else.
Given what you said earlier, that there might be some savings or no extra costs in not demolishing the building, is there a statutory impediment to giving the building away to a community group, to a...
Chair, that would be a difficult one. We deal with the City of Ottawa, for example, and there are pieces of property that have no use to anyone but us, but the city has a mandate to achieve fair market value. We'd have to take a look at it. Anytime you establish fair market value, and your staff will tell you that, there's all sorts of factors that go into it, and sometimes there's enough negative things involved that it drives the value down. So It's a possibility. I don't think so in this case, but it's obviously there would be a discussion about value.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Huber, questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just would like some clarification on something that you mentioned in your presentation, and perhaps staff would like to weigh in on this. You mentioned, if I heard you correctly, that Nepean High School represents the same style and from the same firm, but I assume the Nepean High School is in much better condition building-wise than Broadview?
I'll start off. It's in good condition, and we need that school. And it's a beautiful example of a heritage property.
So if there was a move to designate the Nepean High School, you wouldn't have a concern with that?
I wouldn't, but let's talk to the boss.
No, Chair, I think, we recognize the importance of that campus to the neighborhood and to the city. And it would be good to keep one example there. And if and when the days come when we have the dollars to do work at Nepean, if the exterior were to be designated, the board would certainly not be opposed to that, always assuming the extent of the designation was reasonable. But that's, I think that's what we're trying to look towards. That would be a different issue entirely.
Okay. Could staff comment on that, please?
Through you, Madam Chair, we did consider Nepean High School as well, and there is the building is listed on the Heritage Reference List, and it is of interest to the city from a cultural heritage value perspective. You will note in the staff report and in the statement of reason that I've referred to Nepean High School and the importance of the two buildings together as forming a campus. So we are of the opinion that it should not be one or the other, that potentially it should be both for their role as a landmark in the community.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for coming out today.
Thank you very much.
It's nice to see you again. Our next speaker is Mr. David Jeans from Heritage Ottawa.
If I can just wait till it's on the screen.
Sure. Welcome.
Okay, just use that slide. Sorry, that one, yes. Thank you, Chair, and members of Planning Committee. As you probably know, I'm Vice President of Heritage Ottawa, but I also live in the Broadview area and was a parent of children who each attended that school for 10 years. And a number of other people have been cooperating on what we've been doing here. You've heard a lot of this already, certainly the first 4 bullets. I'll just say that it really was an important part of the heritage of the township, later city of Nepean, up until 1950 when it was annexed. Heritage Ottawa supports this designation. We don't object to the demolition of the rest of the school, and we have for several years been cooperating with the parent group, Build a Better Broadview, and with the school board. In fact, we made a presentation about this to the school board on the 3rd of February before it even went to Built Heritage Subcommittee. You've seen this picture for about the last half hour. Also this. I'll just go quickly back to this picture from the staff report and just mention that the area that we're talking about is approximately 2% of the Broadview site. It's at the farthest corner from the new school. It's immediately adjacent to Nepean High School. In fact, there are 3 floors of Nepean High School which are within less than 10 meters across the laneway. And it occupies fewer than 20 parking spaces, which is in fact in excess of the city requirements for this site, according to information that staff gave at Built Heritage Subcommittee. It's a very small portion of the current school. The rest of the school has many problems, and we've never objected to the demolition of the rest of the school. Just about the community,
This map from 1915 shows Highland Park, but also McKellar Park, which was founded in 1911, and the school area in red, Nepean and Broadview, were placed right in the heart of this community. Today it's a very walkable community, extending from Churchill to Sherbourne, east-west, and from Carling to Richmond, north-south, and it actually represents the western third of Kitchissippi Ward. There are strong historical links with Nepean High School. The high school actually first met for its first year of operation in 4 of the Broadview classrooms. It's right at the main crossroads of the community, Dovercourt and Broadview. There are hardly any Part 4 designations in the area. Only the Maison Jeanne d'Arc is really in the area. Without talking, I'll come back to reuse later, but I do want to mention that both the architects not only were important in Ottawa, in the Ottawa Valley, but they actually were neighbors, and Hugh Richards lived right next door to Nepean at 550 Broadview Avenue. Just quickly about the 1927 building, as you've seen from the pictures, it's 2 stories with a basement, 10 classrooms altogether. You've heard the rest of, you've heard most of the rest of this. At the back, in the 1927 annex, were the former boiler room, which is empty space at the moment, and 2 washrooms completely renovated in recent years, providing capacity for 400 people in modernized washrooms that do not connect through the rest of the school to the city services. At least that's the understanding we have. You've heard a bit about the cost of renovation, and I don't want to go into this, but again, we are not assuming here that this building should become part of the permanent accommodation of the new Broadview School, and you've heard all the reasons for that from the previous speakers. But our understanding of the building, and you'll hear a little more, I think, from Ken Elder, is that because of the way it was built, there's actually very little asbestos in it. Much of the designated substance problem is in the other parts of the building. Almost finished here. Just finally, temporary uses. You've heard reasons why it shouldn't be used for, instead of the 10 portable classrooms, but I just wanted to point out that if it was, the 10 classrooms in this building would be a substantially smaller footprint and would therefore free up green space on the rest of the site. And because it's adjacent to Nepean High School, the board policy, which actually recommends that grades 7 and 8 should be linked to high schools rather than to public schools, could be implemented in future if there were a decision to incorporate this in some way into Nepean itself. But those are not what you're talking about today. You're basically dealing with the provincial policy statement and your responsibilities under the Ontario Heritage Act, and I hope that you will approve the designation of this important landmark for the reasons that you've been given by city staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does your group, Heritage Ottawa, have any type of suggestions for this committee on use? Because that's the hang-up that I have. We heard it's going to cost about $5 million to bring this tower
to permanent school use standard. And our understanding, and I don't want, this is the school board's business, but our understanding is that temporary accommodation and any fix-up costs for temporary accommodation do not come out of the same capital budget that builds the rest of the school. Now, I can't give you expert advice on that, but that is what I've been told by people who do know. I will tell you that this whole area has a real shortage of community space. In Carlingwood, which is just past the west edge of the area, there is no city community center whatsoever. I operate the rentals in a church. I rent 12 spaces. Capacities are up to 300 people in some of the spaces in that church for community uses because there are no city facilities in the area whatsoever. The only city facility is not actually owned by the city, Dovercourt Community Center, Dovercourt Recreation Center, in this area, but completely over-committed. Dovercourt has actually been ejecting community organizations that have been using it for many years because they are totally out of space. So community uses are possible. As I mentioned, it's right adjacent to Nepean High School, and a physical linkage or just a usage linkage might be possible at some point in the future if it were decided that grades 7 and 8 should be part of the high school rather than part of the public school. But that's all for the future, and you did hear that we're not talking about demolition of this very small part of the present school until more than 2 years from now.
Okay, and I'd just like to add, we're being asked today, before us today, is whether or not we designate this part of the current Broadview School. We're not being asked to, and nor should we be asked to consider whether it's good for the community use or whether the city would want to be part of that. That is not before us in any way. And in fact, if it was before any place, it would be for a different committee, and one that does its analysis very well across the city of what the needs are. So under the Heritage Act, that's not something that we nor have we asked staff to do, to take into consideration whether people, and if it's a private person or whether it is, in this case, a school board, whether they have the money to do something to maintain it. It is not something that is should be part of our consideration. Having said that, and I know Councillor Nussbaum certainly has done some work on this as well. The city has every intention, if this is approved, to work with the school board to give it the best leg forward, whether it's zoning needs or et cetera, to make it a viable place in the community for whatever the purpose would be. That's our intention. Anyone have any other questions for Mr. James? Thank you very much for coming out. We have two more speakers. First of all, I have Sarah Ryan. Sarah, are you here? Followed by Mr. Elder. And I see both of your names are on the presentation that we just had before us. Come forward here and press the button. When the mic turns red, you're ready to go.
Okay. My name is Sarah Ryan. I'm a parent with 3 kids at Broadview, and I live blocks away. And I support the heritage designation, and I encourage the Planning Committee to vote in favor of retaining this small village school located adjacent to Nepean High School at the top of the hill, nestled in amongst the houses. It is one of the few remaining heritage community use buildings and the last of 3 elementary schools built by the village of Westboro. It is a reminder, along with Nepean High School, among the homes in the neighborhood of the neighborhood's past and history. It was designed by a local architect who lived on the street. The current plan is to demolish the building in 2016, which would be the 100th birthday of the original school, which burnt down in 26, on New Year's Eve, when the caretaker stoked the old coal furnace for the night. It is no surprise that renovating an old building is expensive, and likely more expensive than building a new building. If we cannot ask a public school board, a large property owner in the city, and keeper of many heritage buildings in the city, to find the funds, the will, and desire to keep a heritage building, then how can we ask private entities to do the same? I believe that this process and the Ontario Heritage Act is in place for this very situation, where a landowner has gone ahead and planned to redevelop their property without full and proper consideration of the heritage value, and then claim funding as the issue. Through designation, I hope it saves this neighborhood landmark, a handsome schoolhouse with tall ceilings and big windows, much like the room we're sitting in now. And it has a real character that remains in excellent structural condition, that has had few renovation, which keeps its original charm, function, and use. Again, my name is Sarah. I live in the neighborhood, and I hope the Planning Committee votes in favor of the heritage designation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, but I just want to clarify something before you leave, because it was not fair, and maybe perhaps you don't know this, but the school board, and certainly the parents of Broadview worked very, very hard, as you know, if you live in the community, to get the funding from the province. At no time was this place designated heritage. It was after. I'm just wanting to clarify, because it's not fair to say that they have the deep pockets or that they should be able to come up with money. They can't. And in this case, they went forward with a plan having no designation on this. The designation came after the fact. Ms. Collins, did you want to...
Madam Chair, the designation did come after the fact, but the idea of a potential designation has been around for a couple of years.
Well, but it still wasn't there.
Yes.
And so they had no reason to expect that it would come to fruition and to build their site around that piece that we're looking at today.
We were specifically asked to hold off on the designation process for 2 years until the funding was in place. It was always an issue, and it was always put forward to the Build a Better Broadview Committee, to school council, and to the school board that we were going to ask for heritage designation, and we were specifically asked to hold off, and we did. So if the designation process has been delayed, it was at request of the community, not at the request of the heritage people. It has always been felt that this was a heritage building and that it should be retained. And it was thought it would be it would cause problems for the funding. So it should have been considered at the beginning, and it wasn't. And so now to come forward and say funding isn't the issue is a little bit confusing to me.
Well, the points that you made about why it's important to you that it receive heritage designation is what's before us today. That is my point,
so
not about the funding.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Anybody else have any questions? No? Thank you. Thanks very much. And our last speaker, I believe, is Mr. Elder. Ken Elder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to address specifically the 1927 element of the school. I, as a conservation architect, was given access to the hundreds of drawings of Broadview School which survive, and I was very interested to see what the construction of the whole complex was. There has been an unimaginable 8 additions to this building that took it all the way through to the back street. And what I found with this element is it's poured concrete construction. It's got tile between the floor joists. The outside walls are solid masonry, brick and tile, structural clay tile. It is an extremely solidly built building. I was quite amazed. It's probably the strongest part of the whole complex. The other additions from the 1950s are steel frame, open-web steel joists, all full of asbestos fireproofing and all kinds of problems. This building predates all that. It's solidly built. You could park a car on the second floor. The original hot water radiators are still in use from the 1920s. And it's true that the mechanical and the electrical systems have been removed from the building. They were only taken out in the 1950s and put in a basement in another part of the complex. And then the steam line was run in a tunnel across the parking lot to this building. But the biggest deficiency is that it's not been properly balanced, the systems in this part of the complex. It actually would improve the building to have a mechanical system and an electrical room placed back in the original boiler room. But to say that it's structurally not that good or something is totally untrue. This is a solidly built building. It was made to last, and it'll be here for another 100 years. I think as you have the word planners attached to your committee, I think the important thing that is being lost here is that there is a streetscape value on Broadview Avenue. This building established that institutional appearance of that street, and this would be a terrible loss to demolish an element of that streetscape. Now, that's speaking it as an architect, and I don't think that's brought out enough. The other interesting part of this building is a 2-story over basement, and a lot of negative things have been said about the classrooms in the basement, but this is a very special building. It has a very shallow foundation. They probably only dug down 3 or 4 feet. All that ground you see, those terraces were all brought in with topsoil to create that look, and those basement windows are 4 feet high. These are very desirable rooms. These were the original shops, home economics rooms in the basement. It's a very useful building. So I just wanted to get this across. This is honestly, it's in very good condition. It's fully functional. To bring it to fire code standards, they introduced a 1-hour fire-rated enclosure of both stairs. It's operating. It just needs some care.
Thank you, Mr. Elder. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Hubley.
I find what you're telling us is totally contradictory to what the school board was saying. Like you're saying it's fully functional without the mechanical services and a little bit of care. So you don't buy the $5 million.
I don't at all. I talked to a general contractor the other night, a guy that I use on a lot of projects. He's done a lot of these, a lot of the work on Broadview School, and he said there's no way you can put a unit cost on the renovation on this building. This is a classic case where you'd have to break it all down. You price the furnace, you price the electrical system, replacing the doors at the one end. It's a very complicated calculation. You can't ballpark this thing. $5 million is a ballpark.
Okay, so...
Well, you're providing two extremes. They're saying $5 million, you're saying a little bit of care, a little bit of care.
Councillor, can we... With all due respect, I know because we've gone that way and much of the conversation has been about what they can do with it or whether they can do something with it or afford it, but whether whether the building should be deemed to be heritage is what's before us today.
Right. And to do that designation, Madam Chair, clearly involves, I believe, a significant cost to buy all these things when we also have another location right next door that fits the same criteria. So I'm trying to make up my mind, and I'll stop the question.
And that's why I haven't said much, because I know that the colleagues are engaged with that thought as well.
Right.
Thank you.
Because somebody's got to pick up that bill.
Depending on what the purpose is. And the fact is that's not before us today either. However, the strong resolve of the planning department to work, if it is designated, if committee and council do agree to designate it, the strong resolve is to work with them to, one, not stop them in any way, to slow them down in building their new school, but to help them with the proper zoning that may be necessary in order to get good value for it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming out. I think that's it for speakers, so we will close the public delegations and come back into committee. Councillor Nussbaum?
Thank you, Chair. I just thought I would report briefly on the discussion before the Build Heritage Subcommittee, which considered this item. The subcommittee heard from a lot of public delegations, both for and against, and you very correctly stated, Chair Harder, that what the question before the Build Heritage Subcommittee, similar to the question before the Planning Committee, is whether or not to designate under Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act and whether or not the property meets the Ontario Regulation 0906 criteria of the physical value, the historical value, and the contextual value. And I think Ms. Collins did an excellent job of providing staff's advice on why this building does meet the designation. That said, there's no question that there is a human element to this, and I think it is important to note a few things that came out of the discussion, because I know that colleagues are also, it's hard to separate the question before us from some of the more, as I say, human elements. One is that the designation is for the exterior only, so nothing stops either the current or future owner from completely changing or gutting the interior of that building. Second thing is planning staff have been very clear that if there is a designation and there is a need for an amended site plan, that the delay would be weeks and not months or years. So planning staff have indicated a willingness to work with the school board on a revised site plan. And it should be noted, too, as you saw on the drawings, that the building occupies what is now scheduled to be a parking lot. Planning staff have said that there are 21 too many parking spots for what is required for that site, so it's clear that a smaller parking lot and not play space for for children would be the consequence of keeping the building. Fifth, that there was no cost increase in the new school construction. I think that's important because I know that parents were worried about whether this would cause some siphoning off of the capital funds which were made available to the new school. And sixth, and this is my last point, that under neither option would children be housed in the original school. And I think that was very important for the parents who were here during the Build Heritage conversation. It was important for them to hear that. So that just gives you a bit of a flavor of the human dimension of the conversation. But as you said, the Build Heritage Subcommittee recommended unanimously to designate the property. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So, Councillor Chiarelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think the only question before us is whether on planning principles and heritage principles this designation should happen. All of the, well, I guess 95% of what's gone on here today has been discussing the plight of the property owner, which I'd like to see at other heritage discussions, but it doesn't happen because we always focus on the question that's in front of us. So you look at the question that's in front of us, and the only evidence entered into it today all points to approving the recommendation. There hasn't been any evidence entered today to oppose it.
Thank you. Councillor Lieber, do you want to?
I have one quick question.
Sure. But then you'll go for wrap-up after that if you like. And then I'm going to go to Councillor Blais after you. And then Councillor Brockington.
Ms. Collins, through the chair, one of the things that we hear in heritage designation discussions is often there are other examples of this building. Why save this one when there are others? Is there any indication in the Act that it's intended to stand to protect the last example standing? I mean, what is the thinking in the heritage community of preservation of culturally and architecturally significant buildings when there are multiple examples?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is a question that frequently comes up. And to answer it, we look to Ontario Regulation 0906, which is at page 24 of the staff report. It lays out the criteria that we use to designate buildings. It does look at things like, is it a rare, unique example? Or it also looks at things that, is it a representative example? So the goal of the Heritage Program in the city is to tell the story of Ottawa through its buildings. We can't tell the story of the history of the school board in Nepean through a school in Centertown. It doesn't tell the same story. So we are looking to conserve buildings, representative examples of buildings throughout the city. So we look at geographic area, we look at different architects, we look at different histories. So the historical value here is different than the historical value of another school in the city built around the same time. The design value may be the same. People say, oh, well, Nepean High School is Collegiate Gothic, it's next door. Yeah, it is. But design value is not the only thing that we look at. So we are looking at the contextual value, the landmark value of this as a complex, as an educational complex. So to answer your question, no, the thinking is not we designate the best, the only, the most wonderful, the last remaining, but it is to designate a wide variety and a representative sample throughout the city.
I'll keep sort of wrap-up remarks short because I know my colleagues and I think the general public understand that I do support designation here. I believe that demolition at this stage closes the door to potential reuse that could make this building a real asset in our community. And I think people know that in a neighborhood like McKellar Park, in this part of the city, we're seeing some really rapid changes. The character of our neighborhoods is changing by the day. I hear from residents frequently that they bemoan the loss of the character and the history and heritage of our neighborhood. It's important that when we have the opportunity to preserve some of that, especially in a neighborhood that is changing as quickly as it is, that we take advantage of the opportunity to do so. So I will be supporting staff recommendation, and I look forward to seeing how the vote turns out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Blaine?
Thanks very much. There's been a lot of discussion about ensuring planning staff work with either for accelerating the site plan or zoning options. I think I have over 100 open planning files in my ward alone, and my experience isn't that there's lots of extra planning staff and time. So how are you going to accommodate that additional vigor, Mr. Mosier?
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Blais, we received the site plan application about 2 weeks ago on January 28th. It is in circulation. It's obviously gotten a heightened profile based on what's come before the two committees. I can assure you that we will process it as efficiently and as effectively as possible, including any changes that might be required that come out of should your committee and council
There's a giant
this
building there now, right? Or there will be if we accept the approval today. So clearly the site plan will need to change to accommodate the giant building that's not anticipated. So my point is, or my question is, there will be not staff redirected from other areas of review to ensure that this meets the timelines that were already committed to with the original application submission.
Through you, Madam Chair. I don't see, Councillor Blais, that would really be an issue. The staff currently assigned to it could accommodate any amendments needed to the site plan that may come out of the decision of this committee and council.
Wonderful. And there's been discussion about flexibility on what kind of zoning might be given to this new building if we approve today. What are the upward limits of that consideration?
Through you, Madam Chair. The zoning for the site now, it's a school site, so the zoning is institutional. Should in the future the school board wish to divest itself of this property, sell it, I would think that they would go through a process of consent to sever and require probably a rezoning in this case to change the use to, or put it this way, the new purchaser might want to have a use that's beyond what the institutional use provides.
Perfect. Is this neighborhood subjected to a community design plan or a secondary plan? Is there one in place?
No. I don't believe this site has a community design plan.
And the surrounding zoning of housing is what? Within a, say, 1 kilometer radius?
It's a mix of zone, but generally it's low-scale residential.
Okay. 1 and 3. Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Brockington?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to take us back to what a designation will actually do to the tower. Just so it's clear in my mind, I'm still fairly new around here. What does a designation do to a building over the long term with respect to the impact on the need for renovations, physical work, even demolition? Is demolition just totally off the table when we designate it with this heritage value? What is the exact impact?
Through you, Madam Chair, Councillor Rockington, if the building is designated, if the school board wanted to demolish the building in 2 years, in 10 years, or somebody else wants to demolish the building in the future, there is an application process under the Ontario Heritage Act where the owner can apply to come forward for demolition. So potentially, if the building is designated today and in 5 years we're seeing it sitting there boarded up and there's no new use for it and somebody wants to come in and apply for demolition, that's something that the committee and council could consider at that time. Council has the ability to approve demolition of designated buildings. And the demolition of the non-designated portion would not require any approval under the Heritage Act.
So just along those lines, if someone were to retain this site, the tower itself, and wanted to build some physical structure around the tower, they would have to maintain the exterior brickwork, the exterior structure of the current tower, but they could do whatever they want on the inside. Is that correct?
That's correct. Document 6 of the staff report is the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value, and that's like a one-page document that would be appended to the designation bylaw, and that outlines specifically what would be included in the designated portion of the building. It specifically excludes the exterior, and it excludes all the new additions. So anybody who wanted to adapt the building for a new use, residential, community use, whatever, could completely renovate the interior of the building. If there was a proposal for additions or any of that sort of thing, it would go through the heritage process. And as long as it did not impact what was outlined in the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value, I don't see any reason that the building couldn't be adapted for a new use.
Can you just confirm, Madam Chair, through staff or the chair of the Built Heritage Subcommittee, if the criteria that were used to formulate their recommendation to Planning Committee were exclusively set out in the Ontario Regulation 09-06, or were there other criteria used to come up with their recommendation?
The criteria used to determine whether something can be designated under Section 29 of the Heritage Act is the criteria in Ontario Regulation 09-06, and that is all.
Thank you. Can staff tell me why Churchill School, which was built in 1910, and Hilson Avenue in 1914, which are basically in the same general vicinity, were not stopped from demolition?
Unfortunately, I cannot speak to that, as I wasn't here when that happened.
Okay, so that's interesting to note, because these schools were built before the school that we're debating today, and they were demolished.
But that isn't before us today, and I don't. When would that have happened, Councillor Leeper? Do you know? At least a decade ago. So it was pre-amalgamation.
It's noted in the staff report, and I just thought it was interesting to note that, older schools either should be retained or they shouldn't.
There has to be an application first that comes forward for the designation, and we do have a registry, which Councillor Nussbaum could speak to how that's going to be cleaned up as part of the work plan over this term of council. Having said that, however, we have what we have before us today. I know it does speak to that, and the fact that those two did come down. I can't speak to that. None of us can speak to that. I don't think there's staff in the room that have that kind of knowledge, and maybe no one flagged it as a recommendation for heritage designation.
I'd just like to repeat my concerns of what the impact will be on the taxpayer if we retain a tower that has no heat, water, or light, that will be boarded up. It'll be very difficult, and I know we're not debating what the potential use is for the site. It's going to be very hard to use this site for anything other than a long-term home for squirrels and sparrows, because that's what it will be, a site that's boarded up with no heat, and you can't do that. So I'm very concerned about setting an unrealistic expectation in the community when we say we're going to designate it heritage value. I think the site's beautiful. I would love to see a plan for this. That is my goal as well. But when we look at what is lacking on the interior, those basic utilities, who is going to take this over? Again, not for us to answer today, but I'm just saying we can designate all we wish and have this expectation set in the community that it's going to be retained and someone's going to take it over. It's not the school board's mandate. They are not going to use this for pupil needs. So they're going to dispose of it. I can't see them wanting to retain that, but no one's going to come forward and take that on. At least I think it's unlikely that that's going to be the case. So we can designate this today a heritage site, but I think we're just setting a very unrealistic expectation.
Well, you're entitled to that opinion, and as you said, it's not before us today. But that's all I'll say. But anyone else have anything else to say on this? Did you want to have yeas and nays? Okay. Councillor Blais, on the motion to designate, on the staff recommendation, Councillor Blais.
Yes.
Councillor Brockington.
Opposed?
Councillor Chiarelli.
Yes.
Councillor Cloutier.
Yes.
Councillor Hubley.
No.
Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor Nussbaum.
Yes.
Councillor Cadre.
Yes.
Vice Chair Tierney.
Yes.
And myself, yes. It's 8 votes to 2. Thank you very much. And just to wrap this up, because obviously to the school board, you've heard the concerns of, amongst my colleagues that were outside of what we had before us today, but rest assured that it is our commitment to you that we will work with you on the future of the designation should it pass City Council. As you said, we're not going to Mr. Carson. It's 2017 before there would be, you'd be looking at, if you would have been looking at doing this demolition. It gives us the time, and I know that the councillor for the area is going to be keen to make sure that he's looking at working with you as well. And Mr. Moser has said to me personally that they will do their part to make sure that opportunities as they make themselves available will be, you'll be helped in that area. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming out on this item. So our next thing we're going to is, our next held item is item number 5, which is the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw for 443, 445, and 447 MacArthur Avenue. Yeah. So, Mr. Hillwire, do you have something to put up before us?
Yes, we're just getting the slideshow prepared. Before us, we have an official plan and zoning amendment that applies to 443 through 447 MacArthur. The application is to amend the city's official plan and zoning bylaw, and specifically with regard to our traditional Main Street official plan policy and zoning. I'd ask Ms. Nisha to present.
Welcome, Mary Ellen. And just for...
Sorry, it's Kirsten. My apologies.
We have the same hairstyle.
You do. You see, I don't have my long distance glasses on, and you changed your hair color.
Pardon?
You changed your hair color. Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
So Kirsten is before us today, and just because, and obviously I even know who she is, but I can't even tell from a distance. So I think that in order that we all learn, I mean, you get to know the planners in your neck of the woods, but I think that it's really helpful for us to know those from other places as well, so you can put a face to a name. So welcome today.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Kirsten Nitcha. I'm the file lead for the 2 applications we're considering today, 443 through to 447 MacArthur. So in front of us, we just have a location map. Outlined in red is the site. It consists of 3 smaller properties that have been consolidated into one through ownership. As you can see, it is west of Saint Laurent Boulevard, approximately 175 meters. Just to give some context, the 3 surrounding properties outlined in yellow are owned by the same property and are currently the site of the Bel Air, Lexus, Toyota dealerships and showrooms. Just a brief, I guess, pictures of the site. This is the site. It's currently used for surface parking associated with the surrounding dealerships. And then just moving around, you can see the existing buildings, the Toyota dealership across the street, and then kitty corner to the subject property, and then this is across on the west side of May Street, the Lexus dealership. So the site is designated in the official plan as a traditional Main Street. Traditional Main Streets are identified and targeted as areas for intensification. Policy 6 of this designation specifically prohibits new automobile type uses, including service stations, dealerships, etc. And this is to protect the pedestrian environment and put forward the planned function of traditional Main Streets, which are to be pedestrian-friendly and transit-friendly neighborhoods. The TM designation also encourages redevelopment of existing automobile dealerships, and it does acknowledge that there are existing sites, and they are permitted through zoning of the site. This is just a visual representation of the official plan. As you can see, MacArthur is designated as a traditional Main Street, and then Saint Laurent to the east is an arterial Main Street, which is represented by the red line, or the red dots. So pursuant to the TM designation, the site is zoned for traditional Main Street. The traditional Main Street zone accommodates a wide range of uses, retail, commercial, office, as well as residential and institutional. It does exclude auto-related uses, including service stations, and is intended to promote compact, mixed-use development and to ensure street continuity and compatible development. The development proposal that was the subject of the two applications today is for an automobile service station limited to servicing only, so it would not include any retailing of motor vehicles or fuel or any other automobile-related products. And along with that development proposal, we have 4 outdoor parking spaces. The building itself will have obviously service bays, offices, a mezzanine, and then as well as underground parking. So just to show you what that would look like, this is just the landscape plan that shows along the bottom is MacArthur Avenue, and then the street on the west is May Street. That's the corner that it's located. And you can see the 4 outdoor parking spaces with vehicular access at the front of the building parallel to MacArthur Avenue. And just showing what it would look like on the ground floor, MacArthur on the bottom again. You can see there would be lineup, I guess, for service station or display of the vehicles waiting to be serviced in front of the building, as well as a ramp that would be used to access underground parking. And these are renderings provided by the applicant to show what it would look like. The top picture shows what it's proposed to look like along MacArthur Avenue. As you can see, it's a solid facade of glass with no front door. The access is to be proposed off the side facing May Street. You can see the service bay doors as well as a pedestrian door as well. So the applicant has requested amendments. The official plan, as it does not permit this type of use, they have requested an exception for a site-specific exception to this policy. And then in line with their request to amend the OP, they've requested a zoning bylaw amendment to permit this type of use on the site, as well as site-specific performance standards for landscaping, the location of the front door, as well as parking. And staff's recommendation, department recommendation, is that the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendments be refused to permit this use. The official plan, traditional Main Street, calls for pedestrian-oriented and transit-friendly environment, and for the streetscape to evolve into that planned function over time. So, and the overall automobile service station is not consistent with this planned function for TMs, and so our conclusion is that it be refused. So from that, we welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Councillor Hubley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a concern with this one as to how MacArthur gets designated a Main Street. This is what the problem is here. You have existing buildings on 3 of the corners, all by the same owner, same functions, and we've encouraged that over the years and encouraged them to buy up this other corner for future use, and now we're using the designation to say, well, no, everything you're doing on the street's wrong. I'd like to get an understanding as to how we get there with this designation and how wide we're going to go with this, because what I just saw up there, if you're telling me a traditional Main Street is something that has businesses as well as residential on it, that's an awful lot of streets in the city.
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Hubley, this is not a new designation that applies to this street. In fact, it's been a traditional Main Street for longer than a decade. The old plan had it as a traditional Main Street in 2005, and the new plan kept that designation. So it is not that this applicant was surprised by a new designation. It always has been this designation.
Did we not approve the other building in 2007?
There was a rezoning that permitted the expansion of the auto-related uses on the northwest corner of MacArthur and May. I believe it was 2006. I can't speak to the details of the debate that occurred at that time. All I can say is that in a designation as traditional Main Street then or now, this type of use is not permitted in that designation and requires an OPA. I wasn't here to go over the rationale that may have allowed for that rezoning at the time, But in today's world now, we're not recommending that that continue.
Thank you.
Councillor Chiarelli and then Councillor Blais.
Okay, just to get some perspective here, can you outline what was on this property before the properties were assembled by the owner? Because first of all, I want to point out the owner is not, a major developer. The owner is the owner of a business, probably isn't really wrapped in following our changing planning policies from year to year. But can you outline what was on that property and what the community concerns were at the time?
Through you, Madam Chair. The three properties, I guess, have assembled ownership over time. Right. Starting with the most easternmost property, well, actually, all three properties at one time did have old houses that had been converted to commercial uses, and over time, the property owner has been purchasing these properties and demolishing the existing building. Most recently, I believe the latest one, which is the corner property, was in 2010. So I cannot speak to any community concerns at that time.
Okay. Well, wasn't one of them an adult entertainment parlor and another a pawn shop?
I believe so, yes, and a video store.
Oh, and a video store too. Sorry. Well, so you have what you have here is an owner who has got rezoning on another property for a continuation of an existing use, and then assembles three properties, working at least in consultation with the local councillor, I presume, if not staff as well. I'm wondering if at any time anybody told the owner they would not be able to continue or extend the type of use they have on the other three properties.
Through you, Madam Chair, the applicant was advised as early as they came in that this was not...
I'm talking about during the assembly of the property phase.
I can't speak to whether or not we were asked that question at the time of assembly of properties.
Well, you weren't here for one thing, but Councillor Chiarelli and I are the only ones I think that were here when this first started, but I think that if I recall correctly, there was an issue in the neighborhood with the traffic associated with some of the businesses that encouraged the local councillor to go to the owner to suggest that maybe he'd start looking at would he be interested in helping him out with possibly
by
buying
doing the property assembly and potentially extending his use.
Yeah, well, and we weren't flies on the wall, but that's how it went happening. But that's before us today is a brand newly minted official plan. We put the zoning into place, and that's why staff are sticking with the certainty that what that means. And that's why they've come up with the recommendation that they have today.
Okay, so my next question then, in terms of recent new development on MacArthur, I went out, as I usually do, to look at the property because you always see it differently once there's an application. And one thing I was happy to see is the Fresco was there. Gives options for people. I don't see a lot of other new construction on that street. And has there been, and how do you expect that to unfold? And do you think, sort of the extension of that is, do you think Main Street designation is really going to take in this kind of landlocked piece of property that's basically landlocked among that one use?
Through you, Madam Chair. On this stretch of MacArthur, we have had one or two confidential pre-consultation meetings with potential applicants in terms of one or two of the properties on the street. But you're right, the street is slow to change over to a fully realized traditional Main Street. But right now, I count 62 permitted uses that are allowed under the traditional Main Street zoning for these properties. One that's not on that list is this auto-related uses. And so what we would like to see long-term is the rehabilitation of streets like this so that they become more pedestrian-friendly, They have a finer grain to them. They're not as wide rights of ways. They're more neighborly in terms of their context. Granted, there is this dealership on 3 corners. That doesn't mean it's appropriate to just make it on 4 corners. We want long-term to turn the street into traditional Main Street.
But, so my next question is, the kickstart or catalyst for new construction on a street, don't you think that's often when you get something that is like a gateway that's like one new development? So you get that last corner under this type of development, isn't it going to be more appealing to people who are looking at MacArthur to relocate to MacArthur?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think allowing an auto-related use like this is not a neighborhood-related use. It draws in people by way of auto. It doesn't necessarily fully serve the local neighborhood like a butcher shop would, or a restaurant, or a hardware store. It's a different type of use, and appropriately so. The city has said that these type of uses should be on arterial main streets, not traditional main streets.
That's it? Okay, Councillor Blais. Question? Yes. And then I'm going to go to the applicant and his representative.
Sure, thank you very much. Mr. Missy, you mentioned that there's a long-term plan to bring this street back to some traditional Main Street. When is the timeline for the capital investment required to do that?
Through you, Madam Chair, when I referred to the long-term plan vision for the street, it wasn't related to capital planning on behalf of the city. It was related to council's approved official plan policy and zoning that sees on this street in the long term that it turns into a traditional Main Street. And I can't predict for you how long it will take for properties to redevelop and have those uses come into those sites. I can say that if we perpetuate or continue uses that are not permitted in a traditional Main Street, we're certainly not helping the situation.
So what kinds of uses would currently be permitted on that site? I heard talk about pawn shops and sex shops. And would that be allowed on the traditional Main Street?
Through you, Madam Chair, no. Those 2 uses you referred to, I don't believe are permitted. The type of uses that would be permitted are the ones that you would normally see on a traditional Main Street, such as a bank or a community center, a daycare, an office, mixed uses like a converted dwelling or a bed and breakfast. Sure. It's a variety of the standard mixed uses.
So why are any of those uses more compatible with Main Street than a service repair shop? Why are they more compatible than this?
Through you, Madam Chair. Because they serve the local community, the residents that surround the site. While there may be 1 or 2 residents in that neighborhood chooses to buy a car from that dealership, generally those types of uses draw in. They're destination uses, they're not local uses.
But a bed and breakfast serves tourists.
It does.
Okay, so they're not from the community, though?
That's correct. Okay. That's one of 62 uses permitted.
Okay. And how do we define community? How broadly do we go? Like, what's the geography we talk about, radius-wise, when we're talking about the local community?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't believe there's a defined numeric value to what the local community is, but to some degree it's the surrounding residential zones that abut the traditional Main Streets. The traditional Main Streets primarily serve those neighborhoods.
And so we're presuming that no one in those neighborhoods is going to buy a Lexus?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, I am not making that assumption.
Okay. What's the plan? Traditional Main Streets, in my recollection, typically allow on-street parking. So what's the plan to allow on-street parking on this street?
You are correct, Councillor Blais. Generally, traditional Main Streets do allow on-street parking to serve the local shops and restaurants and uses on that street.
Which is how, in fact, you actually get them to be local, to encourage walking, because parking is more convenient right in front of the shops, and you can walk up and down the streets.
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct, and certainly we'd like to see in the long term that happen to MacArthur.
Wonderful. So when is your recommendation coming forward to allow for no parking, to allow us to realize the Main Street designation?
At this time, Madam Chair, I do not have such a recommendation.
Okay. Also, I have other comments after the presentations.
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I can go to delegations. Okay, so we have Mr. Holtzman, and did you, and we also have Mr. Perron. Do you both want to come up together?
Well, Madam Chair, members of committee, my name is Bill Holtzman. I'm the planning consultant, part of the development team of professionals that were engaged by a Bel Air group of companies. The president is Michel Perron. He's here now. I'm going to rearrange I'm going to be 5 minutes, but I'm going to rearrange because I think it's very important to answer one of the members' comments about 2007, because that's very, very important. I'm going to read very, very briefly from the staff report in 2007 when the northwest corner, there was an old service repair and automobiles. Could you put on the... oh, there we go. I'll just put up Mayor photo here. Where is it? There we go here. Oopsie. No. Okay, there we go. So the northwest corner is the site that was referred to in 2000. Very important. This family has been in business, had properties here since 1974. 40 years. They sell cars. They repair cars. They're not planning consultants. However, back in 2007, under an official plan that had a designation of traditional Main Street, they were wanting to expand and modernize that Lexus dealership. This is very important because the site had on its 2/3 an existing service repair and car dealership. However, it was not properly zoned. Okay? They wanted to add to it. Staff acknowledged that. They would then bring it into conforming zoning and add another piece. The official plan clearly said at that point, and I'm quoting from the 2007 staff report, Policy 3636 outlines that existing gas bars, service stations, automobile sales, and drive-thrus located in traditional main streets that are permitted under the zoning existing of the date of the adoption would be permitted to continue. So right away, it didn't. However, staff did not recommend at that time an OPA. They suggested rezoning. My clients were very thankful for that, and they appreciated it. But that would lead them to say, aren't we welcome in this neighborhood? So that was the genesis for the approval of 2007, and I should tell you, too, that the staff report, rightly so, highlighted the urban design elements of that project in 2007. You saw a photograph of here, an award-winning building with glazing and all these things. That's the strong reason relied upon the urban design. Fast forward to today, it's the same thing. It's essentially the same thing. They also, 2 years ago, were permitted an expansion to the Bel Air Toyota on the southwest corner. Now, they had the zoning, but again, city cooperates, and they're very thankful for that. They're just carrying on with a vision they've had for 41 years now to complete the picture. So you've heard a number of other things, which I won't repeat, in terms of what went on. So I'll just go back. The staff report actually, I believe, is very fair. In fact, I think it's very helpful to our case for these 5 reasons. First of all, so I won't go into that it's a limited service station. A service station has a connotation of, all sorts of other things. No, it's very limited to the one idea in behind a curtain wall. But the staff report helps us, I believe, very strongly in 5 cases. First of all, it states clearly that this use would be compatible, especially because of the 3 surrounding corners. Thank you very much. We really appreciate that. Second, it also says, through their report and the attachment of the Community Association, that they've built very strong relationships with their neighbors. Over the course of time, you heard an incident or a couple incidents about how they acquired these properties. The BIA, the Community Association, is very complimentary to their activities that have been going on in our fixture of MacArthur for over 40 years. Third, the staff report acknowledges the proposal is consistent with the broad policy statements of the PPS. Thank you very much. We appreciate that because it is. Fourth, the staff report also highlights, and this was to one of the councillors' comments, that this traditional Main Street is actually a hybrid. It actually has many of the characteristics of an arterial Main Street, partly because of look what's going on there, partly because there's no on-street parking, and a number of the other elements that are very, and I think Mr. Mitzi correctly states, it's a challenge to turn it towards and realize this dream of the traditional Main Street. So we're looking at all these things together at 10,000 feet looking down. Now, one of the things, again, the lack of on-street parking is critical to the access of any traditional Main Street, and they do rightly say that there's a plan for some capital improvements. It's in your TPM. I looked at it. It's not before 2031 that there be any money invested in those kind of improvements to make it a pedestrian-friendly environment with maybe widened sidewalks and bus lanes and on-street parking. Not till after 2031. What's going to happen between now and then? How is this official plan going to be realized with that kind of major impediment? So that's no one's fault. You all have, projects in your ward you wish were advanced before 2031. But the fact remains, that's what's in the TPM. The fifth reason why I think the report is also very helpful to us, it accurately and strongly promotes urban design. And we've seen the building that they built, an award-winning. You've seen the renderings of what could go on this northeast corner, again, tying in, having glazing, having display cars, having boutique retail, having some office, and yes, having this offensive service station, the repairs. It's not the old-fashioned where you see the hydraulics going up and down and hear the banging and whistling and that. It's a completely sophisticated arrangement, which Michelle may tell you that this is a requirement from Lexus Canada. So on those 5 points, I think it's actually been very helpful, the staff report. Now, I'll just go back to a couple other photos. How would I get out of this? Just X out? And so, just so you have an idea of what it can actually look like, this is a recent building. Whoopsie. How would you? Double-click on the left button. There we go. So this is one just around the corner. Ogilvy Mercedes, major renovation. This is their service repair. Again, it's not quite on the edge of the street because of traffic issues, but you can see the glazing. You can see an entrance on the side for cars. You don't see you can't see the hydraulic lifts. You can't hear the noise. And they have that kind of experience going on the three corners now, and they have a great relationship with neighbors. And you see, there's no neighbors here. Community Association sent in actually something that was quite helpful and supportive in general terms for us. So if they were really offensive, if they were really a use that was not welcomed, you better believe that there would be community meetings and there'd be people coming out, and they have a great relationship. They've earned it over 40 years. I'm just going to wrap up here. So in conclusion, there are options that we can introduce into the proposed building now to make it more palatable if that's needed. Again, some of these other type of uses. In the fullness of time, the building can and likely will be reconverted anyways to other uses, a higher and better use, and these buildings have a lifespan anyways. If there's a higher and better use, we know that in other areas of the city, the Westboro, the Glebes, Ottawa, so there will be these reuse of buildings and new additions. So that can happen. That helps realize the goal of the official plan. I understand that. I understand what you're trying to get to, but there's just so many impediments here, and there's already so much invested in the area that we're asking for a site-specific OPA. We're not going to want to change the designation because we don't think it's an offensive designation for traditional Main Street. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen for many years, and not that you owe it to them, but they have established a nice rapport. They've moved through, and this would be completing their fourth corner of the vision they've had for many, many years. So that's a development of this type will actually help stimulate investment along that street, because as one of the speakers said, there's been one new building in the past, other than these three, in the past 40 years, and it's a freestanding pad with a pizza out in front of the Freshco. That's great, but that's the one and only. So I'll just cut it off at that point. Michelle, do you have anything to add at all?
I don't think so. Maybe go for questions and that, but then you'll be able to participate. Is that okay? Okay, so trustee. Oh, too many committees and boards. Councillor Hughley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And there can never be enough committees. I just want to clarify, Mr. Holtzman, you've been involved with the planning and working with the city for years, and your mother was obviously very involved with how these rules, if you will, come about. I'm wondering if you understood what I just learned today, that traditional Main Street means we only want you to do business with the locals. Is that your understanding across the city of that designation?
Well, through the chair to the member, the designation is one that, first of all, generally recognizes a certain circa of construction pre-1945, I believe, generally, as opposed to the new arterial main streets, which are the Carling Avenues and the Hazeldean Roads. Right. So right away there was a different function back then. There's a different street cross section. But the most important thing is, so it can cater to people that will drive cars, but also can be walking to it, have those pedestrian elements. So unfortunately, this site has actually some residential on both sides, and those people would come, perhaps, to use the local shops, but they also will come to Bel Air Toyota, Bel Air Scion, and Bel Air Lexus. They have cars. They come. They're in business. They've been expanding. So I think that it's for the local area, but it also is a functioning street that's going to have bus service. It's going to bring people from all over. That would be my answer.
I'll just say, Madam Chair, I'm really concerned with this designation. I think of all the restaurants and retail in Canada, for example, that rely on people from outside of Canada to come in and support them. So what Mr. Mitzi's told me today is very alarming and concerning to me. So I'll just finish by asking you to pass on a message through to your client that, I certainly appreciate the good quality jobs that they're willing to bring in the investment to the community. So if this doesn't work out for you here, by all means, I'll work with you to make these investments in Canada, as I'm sure my colleague would want to help bring that investment to Orleans. So we hope that if this doesn't work out today, that you do consider making the investment and creating these jobs in Ottawa. So thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Not to make it a competition, but there is a prestige auto park being built in Barrhaven, I'll just say that. And the Muse family has the ownership. But having said all that, thank you for the question. Thank you for the question. I have a question for you. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay. I have a question for you, Mr. Perron. When I met with you yesterday, you were talking about the fact that as part of your relationship with Lexus, that this is a condition that they have said that you must have. If you're not able to do this on this site, what is your option then? Would your option be, for example, that you would look for other land to take your Lexus, current Lexus, building on one of the corners, and this new one to a different property? Would that be the only option that you would have? Or would you lose the Lexus relationship?
It is jeopardizing our franchise. There's no question about that.
Can you speak louder, please?
Yeah, sure. It is jeopardizing our Lexus right now because Lexus came in Canada 20 years ago. And when it came in, it was a joint venture with Toyota. And as time went by, Lexus has changed the luxury market in Canada and in the United States as far as that goes too. They wanted to have the high luxury market, I guess, to a higher level. So we had no choice to put a new showroom that would match the identity of that car. And Lexus has asked us also in the last couple of years to make arrangement to separate the Lexus to the Toyota store. And for us to be able to do that, we had to purchase properties. I've working with Councillor Legendre and Peter Clark also, helping them making the community where we are much better. I mean, we've been to many chapters, I guess, on MacArthur. I mean, there's nothing left on MacArthur anymore. I mean, we lost all our confrère business people. We had banks there, we had liquor stores, we had Giant Tiger was there, I mean, we had Ken Tiger, they're all gone. I'm the only one left on MacArthur. So anyways, it took us years to join all these properties together to make the community much nicer to look at. The new Lexus showroom that we built only a couple of years ago, which was granted by the city to us to go ahead and do that, was phase one of phase two. Phase two is actually, it's nice to sell a product, but it's also nice to be able to service it to the expectation of these guests. So when I'm dealing with Mercedes and BMW and Cadillac and all these high-end stores, I need to be able to deliver the type of services that these customers are expecting from us. Right now, I cannot deliver with only half of the building. So this was actually phase one of phase two, like I was saying. I mean, we had sex options. I remember I had, school kids going to school on MacArthur, stopping in front of that sex shop with blown-up dolls and all kinds of. I mean, I've seen it all on MacArthur, and I'm so shocked that I just want to just finish the job that we started 40 years ago. I mean, we just built a brand new facility in Orleans, which I'm sure you're aware of. I mean, it's a 45,000 square foot building. We have Kia, Toyota, and then Honda that's been built on Melbourne in Orleans. It's state-of-the-art companies, buildings that we put together, and I'm sure Mr. Beck can actually confirm that. We just opened that in December. So we've been, I guess, putting our heart and soul out there for making this business and reinvesting in the community. I mean, I've helped schools, backyards, Toyota Green. We put new parks everywhere. I mean, we helped MacArthur, Moffat Hospital. Anyways, I just want to.
You're being a good community partner, is what you're saying. But for the staff that have to look at what the designation is and what it allows, that's why they've come forward with their decision based on that. I think you're hearing from a lot of other people. The sensitivity to the reality as opposed to the ability of the staff to operate outside of what their limitations are. Councillor Leeper has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. 2 points. Mr. Holtzman, you talked about the fact that this building has a lifespan. Can you just clarify about how long this building would be expected to last?
30 years, I would say.
20, 30 years. And then the second point, Mr. Holtzman, you and I were chatting yesterday about this development. This is a neighborhood that is likely to undergo some of the changes that I've seen, for example, in my ward. There's still a fair bit of affordable homes in here. It's R2, it's R3. It's probably going to start to see some of the gentrification pressures. One of the things that's really helpful in a neighborhood is having a traditional main street. And the vision for traditional main streets, just taking it from the staff report, is to develop as more pedestrian-friendly environments with a full complement of cycling and transit services. I'm wondering, we spoke yesterday, and I don't know if you've had any further thoughts about the possibility of putting leasable commercial space in front of this building to animate the street a bit more, while putting the automobile servicing in behind.
Through the chair to the member, the building would be designed to be really looking like a showroom anyways, which is retail sale of cars. Those cars and high-end cars would be parked within the building waiting for the mechanic to move it around. We also would have boutique retail in it. We have a parts supply, and we have the ability for some display cars as well to tie it together with the Lexus dealer across the road. There would be likely a second floor that would have their offices. So there are a number of other uses other than that one offensive use, which would be in behind the screen wall, obviously a key integral part of it. In terms of third-party retail, we've talked about that. That may be very difficult. But again, over time, anything is possible. If there's a market there, if there's convenient on-street parking there, because it has to be feasible. That's all I could say. Do you have anything to add?
Okay, thank you. We have other speakers. Councillor Kadri, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just coming back to the question about other commercial uses on that property, you mentioned, and my question was going to be the fact that in a dealership this day and age, you do more than just repairs. Obviously, you sell parts, you sell tires. Are those going to be part of this function on this building? Yes. So just on that, coming back to staff, you mentioned on slide number, I guess it's 5 or 6, about traditional Main Street zones. The top line says accommodates retail, commercial, office, residential, and institutional. What is the difference between what you're describing in this policy versus what they're suggesting that they will be operating out of this dealership in terms of commercial, for example, or retail? How is that different, what they're planning on doing, versus what the policy states?
And maybe at the same time, Mr. Holzman, because you mentioned boutique items, I think that's what stirred the interest of Councillor Kadri. What do you mean by boutique items while Mr. Mizzi is looking?
The idea being is that at the high-end dealerships, you can go in and get probably a $500 leather jacket that has the Lexus logo, and people buy those, and some of that type of boutique retailing, obviously associated with their brand. I should tell you that we're not asking to remove all those other uses. We're saying add this other use to it. So there's still the opportunity over time, and maybe sooner than later, but we don't promise that all the other uses, the 58 that Mr. Mizzi talked about, of course, they're still going to be permitted, and when there's a marketplace for that and there's a generation of activity, they could be evolving into that. So we're asking for the addition of this use in the zoning, and limited, and a couple of performance standards that we can work on that tie in with the site plan. And the other thing is, of course, the official plan, though, needs a site-specific on that corner, those 3 lots, to say there's an OP policy of traditional Main Street, but on that particular 3 lots and concession on the registered plan, a service station, as defined, would be permitted, an additional permitted use. And that's happened in cases across the city, the wide city.
I'm still waiting for an answer. Maybe I'll come offline. I don't know. But, Madam Chair, I think in terms of traditional Main Street official plan designation, I think we have to be more clearer on that designation, more concrete, because right now, I mean, just that one statement is overlapping in many uses under retail or commercial for that matter. How do we ask business owners to participate in that zoning or the designation when they themselves don't know what exactly does that mean? I mean, if they were opening a gas station, and even a gas station today sells confectionery items, for example, so they become a retail store, obviously. So based on those kind of things, I think, we need to revise or relook at this zoning bylaw for traditional Main Street. Maybe there are different designations of traditional Main Street. For an example, the traditional Main Street in MacArthur may be different designation than the traditional Main Street in my ward in terms of Stittsville Main Street. And then you base those designations on individual streets. Now, people will say that'll open up every traditional Main Street for designation. There are some very similar Main Streets, in Richmond, Richmond Road, Bank Street, Elgin Street. Those could be Manotick. Those could be some of the different traditional Main Streets. But to put this designation on every traditional Main Street, you're handcuffing what I consider to be a very successful business partner in that part of the community by putting this kind of designation. And if they're interested, I know you got an offer from Councillor Hughley. I'll open up Palladium Auto Park in Stittsville for you to come and do business with us.
Well, I'm going to Mr. Mizzi now. Did you want to speak?
Through you, Madam Chair, very briefly. I don't think the issue before us, from our perspective, is retail per se. 100,000 square foot Walmart is a form of retail, but we wouldn't put it in a local neighborhood on a traditional Main Street. I think what we're getting at is there's different purposes to different designations and zones. And the purpose of a traditional Main Street is very different in its nature than the purpose of an arterial Main Street. I think we all know what arterial Main Streets look like when they're lined with many car dealerships. That's a very different look than walking down Bank Street or Richmond or Wellington on a Saturday afternoon. They're very different streets. And a traditional Main Street's purpose, and I'll read it from the zoning bylaw, is to foster and promote compact, mixed-use, pedestrian-oriented development that provides access by foot, cycle, transit, and automobile. So it's about its purpose. We're before you recommending refusal because we're defending council's policies, adopted policies in zoning that say, in the long run, you want that kind of use on the street.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Mizzi, and I appreciate that comment. But my concern still is that the definition of these traditional Main Streets are very cloudy and very hard to interpret in the community from a business perspective and also from other uses perspective. And I understand it's council policy on this, but I still would recommend that we go back and revisit the wording on that policy. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Can I just ask you, what designation does, if anyone in the room knows, does Beechwood have, as an example? It's traditional, and yet it's very different than MacArthur. Okay, Councillor Blais, and then Councillor Nussbaum, and then Councillor Chiarelli.
Thanks very much. Why wouldn't a 100,000 square foot Walmart be allowed on a traditional main street?
Generally, it simply wouldn't fit in. It's the lot pattern, the lot widths, the lot depths wouldn't be sufficient to allow such a large format use on a traditional main street.
So they probably wouldn't even apply for it, though, I guess is the point, if they don't have the lot width.
Yes, that's correct.
Just because your comment, Mr. Mitzi, is very reminiscent. I recall in university reading news coverage, and perhaps Councillor Harder and Councillor Schreller were both here, about opposition to a grocery store going on a traditional main street in Westboro, and oh my God, it was going to ruin the community. And as I drive and walk through Westboro now, I don't live there, but my sense is that that grocery store is at the heart of the community and plays a very important role in the daily lives of everyone who lives around it. I think we get locked very much into some of these notions and hypotheses and visions we have absolutely no money to deliver on. And it, frankly, if we were to accept the recommendation, I think would hold this part of the city back. My question to the delegation, since they're still here, is, given the lifespan of the building is in the 30-year range, is there anything in the design that would preclude its modification to serve another more general retail purpose some point in the future?
I would say it can be used for many other purposes.
So in the fullness of time, if you wanted to move your Lexus dealership to Orleans, and I'll show you a piece of land later to do that, you could convert this service center into a local grocery store or a local hardware store or any number of other generally accepted Main Street retail uses?
I would say yes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So now we're going to go to Councillor Nussbaum. Now, but let me just ask you, I've got Councillor Nussbaum, Councillor Tierney, Councillor Chiarelli, and that's it. Does any of you have any questions of the delegation? So how about... And who are the questions for? Not for the delegation. Okay, so I'm going to go to Councillor Tierney then, who has questions of the delegation, and then we'll release the delegation. And and we also have the item that we have left is the budget, and we have quite a few speakers on that one. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is actually to Bill, because we've worked together on other files in the East End, and I'm noticing kind of a pattern. It's really unfortunate. Just literally 10 seconds down the road at the former Target, or soon-to-be former Target, which employs a lot of people in the neighborhood, that's folding up its doors. Do you see any real other opportunities, just, because, auto dealers isn't your specialty, it's kind of everything. Do you see any other opportunities in the neighborhood that could go in this one location?
Well, the fact is, through the chair to the member, the fact is the zoning does allow a number of uses, but they haven't been realized and they won't be. This current landowner acquired the properties over 7 years from 2006 to 2012 with an expectation and received approvals from the city for this type of use. It's a clustering of the uses. If this was parachuted in as a third-party opportunity, then I myself wouldn't even support it. So I see this as a very logical use. I don't see it as moving so far away from the official plan. I see it very similar in the same rationale that was used by staff to defend the approval in 2007. And I should add, again, when you mentioned the target, sir, timing is very important here, and things change. The industry changes. We worked very hard on the revamping and reconstruction of the Zellers, and for issues far beyond this committee and council and the applicant, that store came and went. It's a shame. So there are windows of opportunity. This is a window of opportunity to complete the vision that this company's had for 40 years.
And I completely agree with that. I mean, I was very hopeful when the Target opened it would help the employment factor. If yet another bigger name left the community. Like we've seen over the last year, especially in my ward, we've lost, a Mex, a Wendy's, an Arby's, a Future Shop, Target. I mean, if we can't even hold on to the large names, I don't know how we're going to get a butcher or a barber. Or I think timing is probably the right way to approach this one. At the same time, I think we do have to respect the work Michael's done to date. We want to get to that vision. But I think the signs and the times of the economy is probably the big hindrance at this point. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. So with that, we'll close down the public delegations. We'll come back into committee, and we're going to go first to Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Chair. I've in fact never been a trustee, ever, maybe sometime in the future. Thank you. This application is in Ward 13, Rideau Rockcliffe, so I've taken a lot of interest in it. I've met with the proponent on a number of occasions. I've met with the Community Association on a number of occasions, and I just wanted to report quickly to colleagues on the discussions and particularly provide some of the views of the Community Association who weren't able to be here this morning. It's important because ultimately the Community Association opposes the request for rezoning and amendment of the official plan, and they do so recognizing that Mr. Perron and his family are important members of the community and have been an important business in the neighborhood for, as you heard, many decades. But the primary reason why the Community Association opposes the request is that there really is a vision in the community for MacArthur to evolve into a traditional Main Street. And the view that I heard was, as we start thinking about the future of that street, the LRT station is about a kilometer away or so. The Saint Laurent area is going to be a TOD, and so the hope from the part of the Community Association is that the LRT will really cause a rise in the interest for mixed-use development in that area. And so I guess the reasons that I think are important, and they're my reasons, but they're a reading of the community and of the Community Association, are, one, we really do want certainty and predictability, and about 12 days ago, or 13 days ago, we as a council approved a fairly fundamental harmonization of zoning on our traditional and arterial main streets to conform with the official plan. And I think that was appreciated by a lot of different stakeholders. And what we're being faced with here is essentially amending the official plan a mere 13 days after we went through what I think was a really important exercise, with the goal ultimately of reducing the amount of spot zoning that happens. The second reason, as I say, was the community is very interested in the future of the Saint Laurent area. I think staff pointed to the fact that Saint Laurent is an arterial main street. That's true, but there is a subzone in that area that has Main Street-like provisions to it. And so again, the vision of the community is to really try and accelerate more of that TOD-oriented development. And lastly, I do think it's important for all of us to think a little bit and to consider the views of the community and their association. And again, they were very, very clear, as am I, that Mr. Perron is an important contributing member of that neighborhood. But at the end of the day, the Community Association feels, and I agreed with them, that to preserve and protect that longer-term vision of the traditional Main Street, we do have to ultimately protect the official plan, uphold it, and provide greater certainty and predictability moving ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. No, not yet. Well, we might as well get the motion on the floor. So we will go to Councillor Shirelli. I've been bumping him down the list, but I do have Councillor Brockington after Councillor Shirelli.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's moved by myself that the staff recommendation be deleted, the official plan amendment and rezoning application be approved, and that staff be directed to bring forward the details of the official plan amendment and rezoning when the matter rises to council. And as I listened to the applicant over the past couple of days and here today at the hearing, a couple of things became really clear, and my memory was severely jogged as I recall the ongoing soap opera with former Councillor Legendre especially, in trying to improve the atmosphere and the developability of that corridor over the years. And, you know, what essentially happened is the city, through its councillor, urged the applicant to assemble those properties and close off the fourth corner of those properties with a related use, specifically to get rid of the previous uses, because the community did not want those previous uses at that location. So you had a very cooperative applicant who is not a developer and doesn't really pay the kind of attention probably to the official plan changes that we make here at council that you would expect a traditional developer to do. Anyway, so this applicant cooperated and went to a lot of expense to assemble those properties, to put together what will be, or what could be, really inviting four corners on that stretch of, on that corridor. Then the city approved rezoning on 3 of the 4 corners. How do we blame him for thinking we might approve the 4th corner? Of course, he would expect that. Why? Because A, it makes sense, and B, he is probably, or this company is probably the best asset that that corridor has as it tries to move forward to developing what they want as a long-term vision. So I think it makes a lot of sense, just from a common sense perspective, to approve this. I also think the city certainly did everything to lead the applicant to believe that something reasonable and in harmony with what exists there today would be approved in the future. And thirdly, if anybody's going to get something going there that attracts other people to build, and to build according to the new plan, it's going to be this applicant, because he appears to be the best asset of that corridor. So that is why I'm moving this motion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brockington, you have a lot of questions, and I probably should have had you go first before we had the motion put forward, but I'm going to go to you and have all of your questions that you had, and then we'll come back and anybody want to speak to the motion, or we'll just vote on it.
Councillor Trelli actually has to present the motion at some point. I'm not sure he said it out loud.
He read it out loud.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But thank you. So, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, based what's on the floor now, my comments are now much more brief than they will be. First, I just want to say I don't fault staff at all for their recommendation to this committee. I believe that from their perspective, it was the right recommendation to bring, and I would like to further emphasize that I fully embrace the spirit of the traditional Main Street look and feel, and what the official plan aims to invite or encourage streets such as MacArthur. I'm not saying what the proponent is advocating for is incorrect, because I believe Councillor Caudry has some questions about further clarification, which I support. We do need that. But I think when staff were answering a question about the types of local services that they envision a traditional Main Street to offer, whether it be a butcher shop or whatever, those are the types of local services that I think we're trying to aim for with respect to a traditional Main Street. Sure, automotive bays and automotive sales centers will provide a service to those in the community, but I think that a traditional Main Street may try and aim towards different types of businesses. When I look at those four corners, and I already see 3 of the 4 corners with automotive type, either a sales center or service center, I can't in good conscience say that for this 4th remaining corner we're going to oppose the same type of, in this case, an automotive service center. When you look at basically it's 2 floors, and when you look at the design plan for that, this will not detract from the community. I think it will add to the community. If these 4 corners had no automotive service centers or service bays, then I would be much more hesitant to approve what the proponent is advocating us to grant. But given that this intersection already has this, that they're low-rise, and I would much rather have a bit more traffic than the types of businesses that Councillor Shirley alluded to used to exist here. So I, too, look forward to the ongoing redevelopment of MacArthur and other traditional main streets in this city, but I agree with the motion that's been put on the floor at this point.
Thank you very much. And I think that everyone has had their say except for myself. I am going to be supporting the staff recommendation. I promised in the very first meeting of the new planning committee that I would defend our official plan, defend our community design plans. Having said that, I'm very honest with you in saying that I think that in this case there should be an exception. So I'm sensing from many of you that that's how you're going to vote, and I think that in the case of this, if hindsight is always easier to determine, then likely an anomaly could have been drafted and approved for this specific corner based on what was in the immediate vicinity around it. I'm sure that if council supports it, we're going to get something that's going to complete that corner. So I'm going to call yeas and nays on the Shirelli motion that the staff recommendation be deleted, and that the official plan amendment and zoning application be approved, and that staff be directed to bring forward the details of the official plan amendment and rezoning when the matter rises to council. Okay? So, Councillor Blais.
Yes.
Councillor Brockington?
In favor.
Councillor Shirelli?
Yes.
Councillor Cloutier?
Yes.
Councillor Hubley?
Yes.
Councillor Leeper?
Nay.
Councillor Nussbaum?
Nay.
Councillor Kadri?
Yes.
Vice Chair Tierney?
Yes.
And myself, no. So that is approved 7-3. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. I'm cognizant of the time only because I set the rules of 12:30, and I know a lot of people have been waiting for quite a while. I'm going to ask Mr. Moser to race like a banshee to get into the seat to give us a little presentation on our budget. And then we have 7 people, 7 delegations that have come out to speak to us, and everyone will have the 5 minutes. So I want to suggest that unless you have immediate questions of Mr. Moser, that we'll go to the delegations and then come back into committee. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Moser.
Madam Chair, while we're getting set up, we're here today to look at the bulk of the planning and growth management budget, both operating capital and also the affordable housing budget, again operating and capital. In attendance today, since the treasurer is with us, Aaron Burry and part of his housing team is with us, as well as the managers from planning and growth management. For the 2015 budget, really it is maintains a status quo from last year. There are no new FTEs for any of the groupings that are in this budget. Looking to catch up with the slides here. Okay. The operating budget, as I say, there's 5 or 6 components of the Planning and Growth Management Department. the numbers are self-evident in terms of what we're looking to. The general manager's office, business services area that we have, the development services area. This includes the urban and suburban group. It does not include the rural group that is dealt with through the ARAC budget. We have our policy and urban design group, and two components of the building service code services branch. One, what's called the non-Ontario building code issues. They're like the signs that we do, compliance reports, those things that aren't tied to the Building Code Act. And then we have the building code services itself. It's a self-funding group, and so it's basically we take in more money than we need to operate it, both directly and indirectly. And as we saw this morning in the annual report, the money that is, that we save as beyond the budget is put into reserves. And that's why you see on that line of building code services, there's a $5 million, if you will, more than we need in terms of dealing with the budget. Affordable housing, again, it's pretty well status quo in terms of last year to this year. And in terms of how we've arrived at the, with the balance, each of the budgets have to balance. And so in terms of the increases we have, to maintain our existing service, we have about $700,000 worth of increases, and that's balanced off with us looking at the base adjustment in terms of monies that we had as one-time monies last year. We're not receiving them this year, so that will have an impact on our ability to deliver some of our services. We've increased the user fees by the 2%, which is done in each of the budgets. And on the user fees, I have two small amendments that are required to the user fees in this area, and one relates to just a technical amendment related to our signs program, where we put those signs up for notifications. The fees in the draft bylaw don't reflect our new contract we just signed, so there's a motion that we put forward on rectifying that. Indeed, the fees have gone down. And then we wanted to add a new fee for very small legal fees related to easements, and so that'll be captured in an amendment to the user fees. Next slide, please. So, as I said, these are the highlights are basically we're maintaining, which within our department in both the areas, most of our money goes into our salary, so that just the compensation that we have through agreements. We made base budget adjustments in terms of one-time expenses that we had. We're not getting that money, and that was basically because we've completed the program that we had over the last year of council to look at all the transit priority areas along the Confederation line. And as I mentioned, we have increased our fees by 2%. In terms of the capital summary, other than the housing branch has a almost $19 million capital budget. Within planning and growth management, we have one small $150,000 budget, which relates to the coordination of the development charges program for the city. Next. Okay. Still not going. So I'll go back to so these are just, we've got one of them. One of them up in terms of the summary of the capital authority. Basically, it's again mostly related to the affordable housing in terms of our revenues coming from, other levels of government, reserves, and basically development charges which contribute to it to a degree. Yeah. So So that's basically the programs we have. There's another part of the program that will be coming forward, sort of called the strategic initiatives that money has been set aside for operating over the next 4 years. There's a little over $20 million set aside for operating strategic initiatives, and there's, in terms of capital, there's a $92 million if you will, fund that council in May and June will determine where they want to spend this money over this term of council. So that will allow council to arrive at its term of council priorities. Then it will allow the departments to turn their mind to specific work programs that we will carry out over the next term of, or this term of council. In terms of the bulk of what's in front of committee is the planning department, planning and growth management department. Our colleagues from affordable housing are part of this component. They really lead and support the development of new affordable housing, with the intent certainly to advance the housing and homeless plan. In terms of the capital highlights, there are 6 previously approved projects going ahead this year with a total of 216 units. And in 2015, this year, there's $19 million for new affordable housing that certainly using the Affordable Housing Ontario program, we'll leverage that with city funds and other initiatives for the 2015 to 2020 period. So, Madam Chair, that was basically the Banshee version of doing the budget, and certainly prepared to answer any questions that committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moser. We, as I said before we started, we have 7 speakers. We're going to go to the speakers, and I have already forming a list of questions, and Councillor Hubely's at the top of the list. So if anybody wants to have questions post the delegations, put your name on the list. So our first person up is Mr. Ray Sullivan. Followed by Céline Carrière. Welcome.
Let's see.
Sorry for the delay. I don't mean to stand in between you and your lunch. I just have one slide that we'll quickly bring up. I do? I don't need to advance it. It's a single slide. So if you just put it up, that's fine. So my name is Ray Sullivan. I'm the Executive Director of CCOC. We're a nonprofit housing organization, a landlord, and a nonprofit developer. I'm also a director of CADCO, which is our sister corporation that provides development consulting services to other nonprofits, including a number of currently underway city-funded projects. I'm coming to you because I have a concern that the city might be taking a step backwards from some of the achievements that we've achieved over the past 12 years when it comes to supporting the development of new affordable housing. So if I can ask for your indulgence and a bit of patience, I want to recap some of that progress over more than the past decade. Going back to the early 2000s, there was no federal or provincial program to support the creation of new affordable housing. My organization worked with the City of Ottawa to pilot what is now the Action Ottawa program. And part of that program was a system that allowed the city to waive fees, development charges, and levies associated with the development to make a project that much closer to being economically viable. And it worked. We developed a couple of small projects in the early days of that program. Now, of course, when the city is waiving those charges and fees, what's actually happening for many of them is that the Housing Services branch is paying those charges and fees on behalf of the nonprofit developer. But that was an important step, and an important step in the absence of federal and provincial housing programs. Several years after that, we were quite fortunate that what is now the Investing in Investing in Affordable Housing, IAH program, was created by the federal and provincial government. It added a lot of cash to that Action Ottawa program, and it allowed us and other nonprofits and the city to work together to make significant progress. In 2009, the city started collecting development charges to raise funds for affordable housing infrastructure. And they're modest, but over the past 5 years, the city's managed to raise just over $2 million in those development charges, and it's an important source of funding as well. The 2011 budget was very significant. This is the budget where the city committed $14 million of its own money for affordable housing and poverty reduction, and significantly, there were 7 very specific envelopes for that investment. The 7th envelope was $4 million per year in capital for the creation of new affordable housing under the authority of this planning committee. That added as much as 40% to the federal and provincial dollars that were being made available as well. Just 1 year later, in 2012, we were all very pleased that the federal and provincial governments renewed the IAH, the Investing in Affordable Housing program, for a further 3 years. And at that time, the city made a commitment to take $5 million from its own housing reserve and extend that over the 3-year renewal for those waived fees, those development charges and other fees that the city would pay on behalf of nonprofit developers. In 2013, the city adopted a 10-year plan to address housing affordability and poverty. And at that time, there was a report brought to this committee that said that council would be asked to, and I'm reading a direct quote, council would be asked to consider the extension of the $4 million capital investments from Envelope 7 of the $14 million Housing and Homelessness Investment Plan for an additional 4 years beginning in 2015. I want to refer you to the slide that's up on the screen and link some of those things to this picture that shows the past several years, the current year, and what we think we can expect for the next several years. And I want to compare what's going on in 2013 and ask the questions about what we can expect in 2016. All of these figures are taken from published city budget documents from 2012 to 2015. The first line, IAH, this is the federal provincial dollars that are part of your capital budget that's before you today. The first 3 years on the chart, 2012 to 2014, were part of that extension, over $25 million. Everyone was very pleased that as much as $48 million was renewed for the next 5 years, and you can see here how it plays out in each of those years. The next line, this is the city's own money, the Housing and Homelessness Investment Plan, that $4 million envelope that was part of the 14 that the city committed in each of the last years from the last term, but is no longer part of the capital budget that's before you. The part that's new in there is those development charges. So it's taken 5 years to build up to just over $2 million. It's great to see the commitment in 2015 that we can make that part of the package to build new affordable housing. But of course, once we've spent it, it's gone, and we can't expect more than $400,000 or $500,000 per year because that's the rate at which the city is collecting those development charges. And of course, the housing reserve. So the $5 million.
Mr. Sullivan, I just want to tell you, you only have 13 seconds left.
Okay, that $5 million commitment from 2012 to 2014. There's a commitment of $2 million from 2015. But I have several questions that I'd like to address quickly because I heard that timer go off.
Well, actually, we're very, excuse me, I used the royal we. I am very strict on the 5 minutes, and so I think that I think somebody may have a question for you, but I'd like Mr. Moser to comment if he can, or someone from on some of the points that have been made.
Madam Chair, I'll ask Mr. Burry and his team to come and respond.
I think the fundamental issue that's being put on the table is that we had...
Can you speak a bit closer, please?
Okay, I'll do what I can here. I think the fundamental question that's being asked is related to the $4 million, which is in the Housing Initiative Program here in Ottawa. This year, within the social housing budget pressures. We had $9.3 million in budget pressures, and those could not be absorbed within the Community and Social Services budget. So we made a determination that in order to work within the 2% and not cut other services to vulnerable individuals, we needed to move that $4 million to cover off the pressures in social housing. In addition, we moved $2 million others, plus we're looking at over $1.5 million in other solutions that we have to find by the end of term.
Just another question on that. When we were talking before the committee meeting, you were talking about the direct pressures that we're having on $1 billion asset and how it's a $9 million pressure. Maybe you just want to comment on that?
So essentially, these pressures are all related to mandatory indexes that the city has to pay out for social housing. So social housing, it's in terms of increases in mortgages, increases in rents, rent-geared income, insurance, all those costs, we are required to pay out a mandatory amount to social housing providers. That's where the $9.3 million comes from. Now, those are our best estimates. We always hope to do better, but in this climate, we can't expect to do better in many instances. We've remortgaged a lot of the properties together with our partners. They've been mortgaged at some of the lowest rates in history, so you're not going to continue to see that additional benefit beyond where we currently are. So the $9.3 million is what we anticipate to be a real pressure in terms of maintaining social housing.
Thank you for that added information. Councillor Leeper, do you have questions of Mr. Sullivan?
I do. Mr. Burry, some of these you may be able to answer as well. Just curious, the HHIP funding, how was that funded? What was the funding source for that?
It's 100% city. That was the $14 million that was determined at the beginning of last council. So it came from strategic initiatives.
Perfect. And then, Mr. Sullivan, you and I were chatting yesterday. With respect to the housing reserve funds, you've got a view to whether or not those are going to continue at the same rate that they have been or not?
Yeah, we saw in the last term of council that there was some money set aside to go along with the investing in affordable housing for the whole period of that program. I'd like to know if there's a commitment from this community council to do the same thing in 2016, 2017, and 2018. Otherwise, 2016 and 2017, we're doing a lot less than we were in 2013 and 2014.
We'll go to Mr. Burry.
That's directly related to how many properties the city actually sells, because we get 25% of that revenue. That's where that comes from. So it's all based on how many properties the city has and how many are actually put up for sale.
So it's very unpredictable because we know the bills are going down.
Is that the trend, though, is down? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
And then, Mr. Sullivan, as a affordable housing builder, these $4 million from the HHIP are gone. This year, we've seen a top-up. I would characterize it as sort of one-time from the development fees. We've seen a top-up from housing reserve. Those probably won't continue at anywhere near the same rate moving forward. With those $4 million in capital dollars gone moving forward for the next 4 years, what is the impact for you as a low-cost housing builder?
Yeah, and the contribution coming through the federal and provincial governments in the IH is a bit richer in 2015 because there's a $5 million quick start bonus, but it goes back to its regular level of about $10 million after that. And that $4 million that the city was kicking in, you're talking 30 to 40 new homes. You're talking 30 to 40 people who were homeless, who needed supportive housing, who needed affordable housing, who won't be able to get it. That's a 40% difference from what was on the table from the province and the Fed. So we would be doing a lot less if we're not able to replace that money.
Write it down, and we'll deal with it after we have all of the delegations. Thank you very much, Mr. Sullivan, for coming out today. Is Céline Carrière here? Oh, there you are already. Thank you very much. Wow. And followed by Chad Rollins. So, Chad, maybe you could come up and get ready in the sidecar. Thank you. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Good afternoon, councillors. Thank you very much for hearing me today. I am the Executive Director of the Cooperative Housing Association of Eastern Ontario. So we represent about 3,000 units of affordable rental housing. We're run democratically, so we're formed as cooperative enterprises. Together with the city, about half of our co-ops are under a service agreement with the city, half fall under operating agreements with CMHC or are out of their operating agreements. So I myself am a co-op member, and I have a roommate who's a teacher. So a few months ago, she was speaking with her grade 4 students about homelessness. Without hesitations, her students said, everyone should have a home. When asked why, the response was, well, it's the right thing to do. Duh. They're grade 4. Now, these idealist students in Barrhaven are certainly not alone. The fact that the City of Ottawa's 10-year housing and homelessness plan includes the priority that everyone has a home is telling. That plan includes some very lofty and audacious goals. Ending chronic homelessness is an audacious goal. We in the affordable housing sector strongly support the city's plans. In fact, we're partners in the solution. We've enjoyed many successes in the past few years. The $14 million investment in 2010 was a huge milestone, and it was an audacious commitment. Unfortunately, the budget tabled in 2015 is not quite as audacious. We in the not-for-profit sector know well the pressures and challenges of presenting a budget that meets everyone's needs. The task before you is a challenging one, and we certainly appreciate that we're not the only ones asking for money. But an affordable home is a basic need, and many people rely on the city to help them find this. So you've heard some of the numbers from Ray, and I'd like to add the voices of 3,000 households to his call. Our sector needs the city's financial commitment now and in the next 4 years to reach the audacious goal that we've set together. The 40,000 people in core housing need in our city need that commitment. We're all excited to see new affordable housing being developed, but having the carpet roll up behind us and having to sell off other units becomes a real risk if the budget is not only maintained but also grown. The Mayor stated last week that affordable housing was one of Ottawa's key priorities. I urge you to support the roadmap set out before us by reinstating the full $14 million and going further, making an additional $2 million commitment in 2015, and many councillors supported this during the campaign. Our co-op members, the tenants of not-for-profit housing, and those waiting for an affordable home are looking to you to make the financial commitment to our capital needs in our sector so we can make sure that we get it right in the eyes of those grade 4 students in Barrhaven and everybody else who lives in Ottawa. Simply put, we can't move backwards. We need the $14 million and more to provide affordable housing to those who need it.
Thank you very much for coming up. You have a question of the delegation?
Ms. Carrier, Mr. Sullivan quantified the result of removing that HHIP money moving forward as somewhere, I think he said 40-odd homes per year. Do you have a notion of what this funding, I'll call it a reduction, might have with respect to cooperatives?
Well, I mean, I don't know that at this time there are any housing co-ops that are slated for development. By their very nature, the residents of housing co-ops are the ones who own it. So in the past, when they've been formed, they've been based on founding boards and consulting firms. But certainly, it limits that prospect, and it limits the ability to continue to grow and develop as cooperative communities. If the capital can't come from within the housing co-op members, they're renting, right? So it certainly limits the ability to grow, like Christian Seniors of Eastern Ontario, adding a phase 2 a few years ago, and certainly some of the other co-ops that have benefited from the funding. So,
Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. You said the reinstatement of the $14 million, but I just want to be clear that I'm understanding it's not so much that the $14 million has disappeared, it's this reallocation of the $4 million from capital to operating. Is that correct, Mr. Burke?
That's correct. And the other point that I think is important to understand is that in the last term, in terms of affordable housing, we spent $42 million, all sources. This term, we anticipate spending $48 million. So we'll actually spend $6 million more, or about 50 more residences built in this term than last term.
Good. Thank you very much for coming out. We'll go over to you, Mr. Rollins. And is Joan Kwiak here? Joan? Just come down and have a seat so that you're ready to go. Sure.
While I speak here, this should just play on its own and give you a bit of a photo tour of Sandy Hill. Good morning, Madam Chair, or are we good afternoon now, perhaps? Madam Chair, councillors, thank you for having me today. My name is Chad Rollins. I am President of Action Sandy Hill. I'd like to thank you for giving ASH the opportunity to provide our input regarding the draft operating and capital budget. We want to emphasize to you today how heritage preservation can advance one of the city's own stated priorities, namely economic development, specifically the growth of tourism and small business. Sandy Hill is a community of astonishing national historical importance, has been home to 7 fathers of Confederation and 8 prime ministers, in addition to numerous national luminaries, including Sir Sanford Fleming, World War I flying ace Billy Bishop, acclaimed photographer Yusuf Karsh, Archibald Lampman, a Confederation poet, numerous Supreme Court justices, etc., not to mention Canada's own Bletchley Park. Indeed, the very neighbourhood itself has contributed to the development of the story of both Ottawa and Canada. Sandy Hill includes more than 850 pre-war buildings, 6 heritage conservation districts, 29 individually designated heritage properties, 1 National Historic Site at Laurier House, and 1 heritage landscape, Strathcona Park. In addition, many of the fine old mansions survive, including 31 as embassies or legations. The 2010 Sandy Hill Heritage Study noted that parts of Sandy Hill retain a very high percentage of original construction, and this fact alone allows the area to stand as an example of the evolution of urban domestic architecture in central Canada over time. Several cities have leveraged their built heritage as a driver for economic development. As evidence of how this approach could work for Ottawa, I'd like to bring 3 brief examples to your attention today. Winnipeg, Manitoba, for instance, has implemented a heritage conservation tax credit. They did that in 1998, and it provides a credit for up to 50% of the cost to repair, stabilize, and rehabilitate designated buildings, and to preserve their heritage elements. Now, I know we have a grant in Ottawa, but that's limited to $5,000. This has no limit. This is a credit that can be used any time over a 10-year period to reduce qualifying property taxes. Between 1998 and 2006, that Heritage Conservation Tax Credit in Winnipeg provided $32.7 million in tax credits, and that leveraged $149.9 million in investment. Recipient properties averaged a 486% increase in their assessed value, compared with other properties in their immediate areas, which increased by 142%, and only 40% overall for the city of Winnipeg. Charleston, South Carolina is another example I'd like to raise, which has built an entire tourism industry on its heritage. Their slogan is even, Charleston, where history lives. Tourists identify their history and ambience as Charleston's greatest asset. And their capitalizing on this built heritage has brought 4.5 million tourists to Charleston in 2011, with a total economic impact of $3.22 billion. Final example I'd like to raise is Asheville, North Carolina, which is home to the historic Biltmore Estate. That house alone attracts 1 million visitors a year and has spawned its own tourism industry, which now includes an inn, winery, and agriculture and reproduction businesses. The direct economic impact of Biltmore includes 4,400 jobs, $139 million in wages, $238 million in value-added expenditures, and $27 million in state and local taxes. ASH believes that the preservation of Sandy Hill's rich heritage can bring similar economic opportunities to Ottawa. This budget provides an opportunity to realize some of that potential through strategic investments. With a view to preserving and protecting Sandy Hill's heritage resources, we'd ask first for monies to be allocated for completing and implementing the Uptown Rideau Community Design Plan that is now underway, including incentives to encourage rehabilitation of our traditional Main Street. Updating the Sandy Hill Secondary Plan in order to guide future development in our neighborhood, adopting the report of the 2010 Sandy Hill Heritage Study and implementing its recommendations. And as regards the Heritage Tax Credit, ASH proposes that, pursuant to the Province of Ontario's Municipal Planning and Financial Tools for Economic Development Handbook, the City of Ottawa establish a heritage tax credit to encourage good stewardship, maintenance, and conservation of heritage properties. It's worth noting that the U.S. National Park Service undertook a study of the economic impact of the U.S. Federal Historic Tax Credit. Am I out of time?
You are, Chad.
Okay.
But I wanted to say that was an excellent, I love the pictures, but I think that the research you've done is compelling.
Hopefully you do all have a copy of this in slightly more detail.
And to tell you, and just so you know, I mean, that is something that is on our radar. I know I'm just the recently past chair of the Built Heritage. Councillor Nussbaum is the current chair. And Mr. Mizzi is the lead staff person on this. And we know that we could do a lot more with some kind of, well, certainly more than the $5,000, and it's capped at, I think, $150,000 is the entire budget for that purpose. It's something that we take seriously, would like to work with the Heritage Ottawa and yourselves, but I think it has to be something that comes from the province for funding. Because I think Ms. Similik, who's sitting there in the audience, could probably, her hair started to go a little bit gray when you were talking about those kind of numbers. But it shows that there could be a business case made, and that could be part of the consideration. I just wanted to let you know that we are looking at ways to improve the opportunities to invest in our heritage. Councillor Nussbaum?
Just to say that I would love to get a written copy of that, and perhaps we could meet offline to further the discussion. Thank you.
Certainly.
Yeah. Good. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Is it Kuyak? Kuyak. Mike is David, you're still here? David Fleming? So if you'd like to come up and take the other chair. Thank you. And then followed by Mike Bultus. Mike, are you here? Yes? Wait, no, I don't need it. Don't come up yet. And also Suzanne Lee. Lee? Yeah, I met you, yes. Thank you. Okay, so for the committee members, presuming that everyone takes 5 minutes and then there's a discussion, do you want to break at 12:30? I think we're going to lose a couple of members. Or do you want to stay for an extra probably 15 minutes or so? What do you say? You're good to stay? I hate to break the rules, so. Are you ready? Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
I've removed some slides to save time, and we've done a written submission too, so hopefully that will help. I wanted to start by saying that Japan and Korea lead the world in public toilet provision. European cities like Oslo, London, and Paris take public toilets into rapid transit stations and on the streets for granted. Australia has 17,000 public toilets. New Zealand is a leader in the world. Even Washington, D.C., which shut down a number of their toilets after 9/11, have now introduced a number of new ones in their new Silver Line. That's happening in many other places in the world. Toronto has toilets in many of its stations. I think most of you are familiar with our pitch about the toilets in the Confederation line, which will have 10,000 users per hour, so I won't talk to you about that. The designs for these toilets can be attractive, safe, and economic. There's a number of advances that have been made in how toilets are designed, and they make a big difference for how people use them and how people feel about them. The interiors can resist vandalism and for easy cleaning. I received a picture of one today that was an article from Atlanta about one today that was quite amazing, and I've sent it to Councillor Blais and Councillor Egley. And the other problem, of course, is toilets for people who are severely disabled. We have none in the city. In Glasgow, they have 40. So we have a number of suggestions for the planning committee and how that network might be able to be developed. And the first one is to say that we think that there should be requirements when there's new multi-unit residential buildings and commercial buildings to make sure that there's toilets available to the public or else the money to put them in, and that there should be directional street signage indicating where those toilets are and within a specific distance. So when you're looking at developments like the windmill development, consideration about where toilets go and who pays for them is absolutely crucial. With the Transportation Committee, policy definitely needs to be developed around the provision of public toilets, and we've made that pitch to Transit and to Transportation Committee, but we have opportunities in Stage 2, in park and ride lots, and in other major bus line locations to make sure that those happen. There needs to be a requirement that large parks and public buildings have at least one toilet that's unisex accessible and has street access that can be open when programming is closed. As we've reduced recreational programs in parks, for example, we've reduced access to many of the toilets. As we've reduced hours in libraries, we've reduced access to toilets. So we think that there could be retrofits of some of these buildings to make them have at least one unit available. The other thing that's of concern to your committee is an understanding that open, accessible public toilets in park fit the definition of expanded recreational opportunity when you're looking at the allocation of development charges. Right now, it's not considered to fit, and for a park like Dundonald or Strathcona, where this would make a big difference, there are ways that development charges could be used to build them. We are asking for the creation of an interactive map like this one in London. They have them in many, many other cities like Seoul and Sydney, indicating where public toilets are available, their hours of operation, their accessibility. And that's basically the end of our presentation to you, unless there's questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Actually, this isn't part of our mandate in any way. I appreciate you coming out, and I understand we have with very many committees, we actually have people that come and talk just because it's an opportunity to talk about what's important to you.
Well, if I could just say, I do think it is the consideration of where the public will have access to toilets is a very important part of the planning of any new development. And at this point, we don't think that's part of it, and we think it's an important consideration for your committee. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for coming out. Thank you. Mr. Fleming?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You have received a written copy of our comments from our President, Wesley Maitland. I just want to briefly just outline a few things. As Planning Committee begins its deliberations on the strategic initiatives for the coming year, we urge you to consider the following issues and provide the Heritage Planning Section and the Built Heritage Subcommittee with the necessary direction and resources for their implementation. First, the need to modify the mandate of the Built Heritage Subcommittee so that it is empowered to advise on all aspects of heritage in relation to applications under the Planning Act, not just the Ontario Heritage Act, thus making it similar to other Ontario Municipal Heritage Advisory Committees. And we're going to be submitting some detailed comments on that to the mandate review for the Built Heritage Subcommittee in the next month. We urge you to increase the city's financial capacity to address development proposals for priorities of heritage interest and in heritage conservation districts in a more timely manner. Councillor Blais asked a question of Leslie Collins today, why was it that the business of the designating the Broadview School came so late in the process? And it's so late because we don't have the resources in our heritage planning section to be proactive, to do that type of earmarking those properties that we should be considering for designation. We urge you to update the city's heritage reference list and heritage register and provide website access to these important documents. Well, we applaud the long-awaited initiative in dealing with demolition by neglect by the previous council and hope that that will continue and that you will provide the resources for city staff to continue that. The current budget for the oversubscribed Heritage Grant Program for building restoration is an excellent incentive for citizens to restore heritage properties. It currently amounts to $150,000. That allows between 30 and 35 property owners to get grants under this program. That's only 1% of the properties that are eligible in the city for those kind of grants, 1%. It provides at best 35 grants. Another way to explore preserving our heritage is to look at property tax incentives for Part 4 and 5 designated properties under the Ontario Heritage Act, and we've been pushing for this now for a long time. It works well in other cities. Peterborough is one good example in Ontario. And we've just heard that it's working well in Winnipeg. So we'd urge you to start doing some work in looking at that as an option. And finally, we look forward to planning with you and others on the various Canada 150 celebrations of the built heritage that defines our city and national capital. And we look forward to working with you to achieve all these objects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that, Ms. Maitland, thank you for staying during the morning, but certainly we've made great strides in our focus on heritage and support of heritage and working with the heritage community. I thank you for coming out today and for continuing to do so. Thank you. Mr. Mike Bult, how do you say your name, Mike? Bultus? Bultus? Bulthouse. Bulthouse. See? Who had that right? And Suzanne, if you'd like to come forward as well to get ready. Thank you.
Madam Chair, we had actually, with the coordinator, arranged that Suzanne and Lisa were going to precede me. If that's possible, we could do that. Otherwise, I'm happy to go ahead.
I don't see a reason to do that, so why don't you just go forward?
Thank you.
Thank you. Does it matter in any way as
we plan to sort of follow up on one another.
Okay. So, Suzanne, if you want to go first. Thank you. And are you Lisa Kerr, then? I am. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks. I wanted to actually start by commending the city and the housing staff at the city for the amount of support that we in the sector have received for the last several years. And I wanted to tell you a good news story. In 2014, MHI, Multi-Faith Housing Initiative, who I represent, won the Action Ottawa Investment in Affordable Housing, and we have received a substantial amount of money, including some Quick Start money, which will allow us to build 98 to 100 new units with a focus on families out in Barrhaven. This is going to service the people who are sitting on the waiting list and who really don't have anywhere else to go. But there's more than that here, and that is that we have been able to fundraise a significant amount of money to add to the city's pot that you have given us. We've been able to leverage your investment, and we will be fundraising an additional $1.5 million on top of your investment. We're already at around $700,000 of that goal. This will result in us being able to build more than what you would have been able to do alone and what we would have been able to do alone. It's really important the city's the way the city supports the sector, and that is if I had to go out and fundraise enough money to build 100 units, it would be so overwhelming, that kind of ask, that we wouldn't be successful. The people would turn away from us. So your support of us is how we're able to really leverage that money and leverage those private funds. What I'm saying is that working with us is a better way to go, and us working with you is a better way to go, and we've really kind of focused on that. We've put together a sector-wide initiative called Broadening the Base, where we're looking at how to leverage different monies out of the sector to support affordable housing in the city. The city has a 10-year plan that you're working towards the end of homelessness in the city for over the next 10 years. And we're all, as I said before, we're all working together. And we're asking you to stay the course. The loss of the $4 million out of capital investment into operational will hurt. It will have an impact. And it would be really great to just kind of stay where we're at and keep going and doing what we've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have any data, or are you
Well, I'm actually quite impressed that Suzanne's managed.
Sorry, I inherited my mother's projection. I'm impressed that Suzanne managed to add me to the Multi-Faith Housing Initiative staff list, since I actually am the executive director of another corporation entirely. If I'm to be included in on the 5 minutes, I'll just reiterate something that I said when I was sitting, I think probably in this chair last year. And that was how incredibly proud I was of the leadership that this council took in addressing homelessness and housing. And I, too, actually, as the executive director of Ottawa Salas, benefited from similar monies. And we're building a 42-unit building in Ottawa South that actually will be hopefully going up this summer and over the course of the fall. $5 million of that came from the city. And that's what, in answer to your earlier question, that's what that money gets you, is home for 42 people, not a temporary shelter, who are doing their best in this city to meet an unmet need, but an actual home where someone can go in the door, lock that door, and it's their place. They have their own mailbox. They make their own friends. They choose when they can come and go. And for our clientele, which is exclusively people who are severely and persistently mentally ill, that is a huge success. It allows them to do all kinds of things that they didn't think possible before because they have a place that they can call their home. And in congratulating Council last year for that bold step of the $14 million, I would urge you to continue that trend. It's not just for bragging rights, because at the time that's basically what I referred to. When we're out there speaking at conferences and events and challenging other cities to follow Ottawa's lead, the first thing that comes out of people's mouths is, Ottawa? Yes, Ottawa. Not Vancouver, not Calgary, not those big light cities. This city took tremendous leadership and a risk when it committed to $14 million, which for many of us in our private lives doesn't sound like much. Except that this morning I spent an hour entertaining a potential benefactor, and the first question he asked me was, how much is the city putting forward? And I am very proud of how I answered him. It wasn't just the amount, it was the fact that there's a plan in this city and that we have a council and a mayor who showed tremendous leadership in this country in actually putting forward money that other cities dream of. I encourage you to continue that trend. Thank you.
Well, just so you know, that the two of you combined had 4 seconds left. So even though you didn't plan necessarily to do this, you did an awesome job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming out. And thank you for being a champion for what we're trying to do in Ottawa. And that's really, if you think about it, for those of us that have been around, I guess there's looking around this table, it's just really Councillor Kadri and Shirelli and myself before Mayor Watson became the mayor. We didn't have that focus and that investment, and that was one of his pillars of the first time that he ran. Yes, welcome.
Thank you, and good morning. So I'm here on behalf of the Alliance to End Homelessness, representing approximately 50 organizations in our city that serve individuals who are homeless, vulnerably housed, or on pathways to stability through affordable and supportive housing. Of late, I want to step back for a second and talk about how, of late, I have actually been feeling an incredible amount of hope and feeling a positive momentum in our city and our community. And I think it's important to recognize that what is happening within that context. Obviously, this has been a frustratingly long, cold winter. We've come through a holiday season where I think once again we see the incredible commitment of our community to try to contribute to solutions, and there's a fantastic charitable response that we see every holiday. I would also say that while sometimes there is a heaviness in discussions of homelessness, I think more recently I've been seeing a positive sense, not a question of whether we can end homelessness, but a broadening of the base of support towards finding solutions to do exactly that. I think people in our community are looking for a collective space wherein their contribution can make a difference. And I find a lot of hope in current and recent research, because we are fortunate to have a growing body of encouraging evidence that points to a possible future where homelessness does not need to be the status quo. And I point to what has been repeated several times this morning, the creation of our 10-year plan and the $14 million Housing and Homelessness Investment Plan that has been helping to guide that. In our work, I truly am quite happy to speak of the city's lead role, your role as a lead partner in all of this work. Indeed, establishing the $14 million HIP in 2011 was a bold, ambitious, and robust instrument. It was a leading policy and program move that municipalities across the province of Ontario, knowing that this was drawing from upload money, could have only dreamed of. It was this $56 million increase from 2011 to 2014 that have made all kinds of new housing units, rent supplements, and so on possible. And that has paid off. We see that in the kinds of commitments and projects that you've heard about this morning. And so I welcome opportunities to speak positively about the work of the city. And of course, while we know the city can't do it alone, I'm grateful that we have been able to count on the city for playing a lead role. But here we are. And unfortunately, with this budget, beyond the verbal and expressed commitment to affordable housing, I'm hearing concern from individuals and our member organizations above and beyond those that have spoken this morning about some of the details of this budget. There's curiosity, there's a lot of questions about this $2 million in new investment that was promised in the election campaign. Why is it not here? Curiosity about why the city is proposing to reallocate dollars from one area within the housing and homelessness envelope, areas that were new investments, towards inflationary pressures elsewhere. Of course it's important that we protect our social housing investments of years past. That's a positive step. But it's not going to be enough for us to get ahead. In the last 2 years alone, individuals and groups have worked hard to get the city to save development charges for affordable housing. We fought hard to increase the provincial homelessness dollars in Chippy. We fought hard to increase investments in affordable housing. And now to see the city drawing on these resources to counter an inflationary pressure and fill other gaps is a little bit frustrating. The political direction for this cost neutrality is challenging in a context with ever-growing need. In 2013, you adopted our city's 10-year plan. We are, through 2015, going to be 1/5 of the way through that plan. And with the measures proposed in this budget, we wonder, in order to complement the 10-year aspirations that are embedded in the plan, I guess perhaps we need a long-term investment plan to make the 10-year aspirations a reality. How are we to know that new inflationary pressures won't come around? While we might fill gaps in 2015, what do we do in 2016, 17, and 18? The 10-year plan is premised upon a hope for future cost savings, that with ending chronic homelessness, we can reinvest dollars currently funding our emergency response into new preventative efforts. Yes, the city and we working with you are working hard to transition to a system that adequately and appropriately recognizes housing first, but we can't get there overnight, and we can't get there if we aren't or if we stop investing in solutions. We can't get there without holding to the investment that you began in 2011. If we want to achieve the 40% savings in the shelter system, as identified in our city's 10-year plan, we need to hold and enhance our investments in the short term to get ahead for the long term. Your investments are crucial. Symbolically, they represent your commitment, as was clear in 2011 with the adoption of the $14 million, drawing on the provincial upload and demonstrating leadership among municipalities across the province, saying that regardless of what the province and federal government do, this is who we are as a city and this is our commitment. Substantively, you've heard this morning that your investments leverage additional investment demonstrated by providers today. More so, they instill the notion that it takes the entire community and hence our public dollars to end homelessness, all sectors and governments. So in closing, I guess I affirm that you have been the lead, and we look forward to you being the lead on an ongoing basis. It allows us to work at broadening the base of support rather than spending so much energy to protect the resources we have. We've been hearing a lot about how 2015 is to be the year of momentum for Ottawa. We want to be sure that this momentum is there for people on pathways to housing solutions as well. We know the strategic initiatives is still coming, and if these dollars cannot be reinstated in this budget, we look forward to that process.
Thanks very much. Mr. Burry, do you want to comment once more on the $2 million? It's just to be succinct as possible.
And that's part of the strategic initiatives that Council will decide on between now and the end of July. I believe the beginning of July is the time frame you've set on those. So that's not in the budget. That would be coming as part of that discussion.
Okay. Thank you. Did you have a question of the speaker?
Yes.
Yes. Go ahead, Councillor Hubley.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for your presentation. And I just want to ask you a question. Like, I read a lot of what you put out, and I think you're doing good work in the area of this. What I'm gathering out of these presentations, I want to make sure that you're in agreement with this. I take the position that, while Mr. Burry and his people do an awesome job with what we do give them to deal with and the funding, I'm hearing stories today about how the group before you, for example, were able to leverage the money. So instead of the city building and running the houses, that maybe we need to start looking at getting better leverage out of the little bit of money that is available and start partnering more with agencies. Would you agree to that?
I would say that right now, I mean, that is, in my view, effectively what is happening, right? The municipal dollars that are given towards new development are being used by housing providers like those we've heard from and many others to leverage additional dollars from the private sector, from other levels of government, and so on. So I think right now, the seed that you are providing is helping to do that. If we remove that seed, I think we take a step backwards.
Agreed. And the other question that always troubles me in this whole discussion on affordable housing is this list of 10,000 or 9,500 names, and we call it all homelessness, when in fact there's not very many of those people that are homeless. It's a need for either they want to upsize or downsize. It could be two seniors, the kids are gone, they're in a 3-bedroom, they'd like to go to something smaller, maybe without a yard that they would have to maintain, and so on. Do you have a better picture than we do as to what makes up that number and what the real needs are within that number?
We know that what every household on that list has in common is that they're spending more than 30% of their income on whatever housing arrangement they have. We also know that within that 10,000 are several thousand that fall under special priority groups, those fleeing situations of violence, those needing for their own health and well-being or safety a new place to live, including those who are currently living within our shelter system. We have on any given night over 1,000 folks in our shelter system alone, let alone those who are hidden homeless. So I think that we do need to separate out that 10,000 and unpack that number, but without a doubt, there are several thousand on there that don't have a place to live.
Absolutely. And so would it not help us better with these investments if we had better analysis of those numbers and what makes up those numbers?
I think we have a strong sense of who's on that list.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out today, Mr. Bilthouse. Bilthouse. I'm going to try and remember that. That's great. Yeah. Okay, so we'll close down public delegation. We'll come back into committee. Can we put this up, the roadmap? I know, but I want this up. We have a technical motion that Councillor Vice Chair Tierney is going to be moving on user fees. It's actually good news. But otherwise, we have a roadmap, and what I'm going to suggest that we do with our smallish budget is that unless you have, I'm going to say, for example, user fees, we'll have the technical motion. The technical motion speaks to signs. Yeah. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, you're correct. It's in front of you. There's quite a bit of detail and numbers, but it does speak to signage. It's actually a decrease in the actual fees, so it brings it more in line with what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay. So actually, what we're doing is having revenue neutral. We're not making money on our signs, and surprisingly, our brand new signs that actually show people what something's going to look like are going to cost us less money. And so that's really why we're adjusting that as an example. So just to finish how we would do that, I'm not asking you to vote on that yet, I just needed it up front, is that I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions of staff on the budget. I know that Councillor Nussbaum will be... Pardon? Yes, and you're first, and then Councillor Nussbaum. And then we'll go and I'll just see if there's some that we can actually just carry on from the roadmap, okay? So, Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, a question for Mr. Mosier. In your presentation, I didn't see a lot about plans to do any hiring or fill any vacancies. Can you talk to that? Like, we know in the past some of the work going through the area is getting delayed because there's a shortage of staff, and so I'd like to hear if you've got some plan and if there's enough money to help you bring that staff in.
Madam Chair, as I said at the presentation, we are not looking for any new FTEs, but certainly if we have vacancies, we will continue to fill those FTEs. So some areas we have some vacancies. I think we have about 6 or 7 vacancies across the department in the planning area, and we are on a program to fill those. So in terms of we're dealing with the the resources that we do have. We're not looking for any additional. And, the only other thing I would say, in the budget, we have been one-time items that we had to help us with some of the planning for the light rail. We do not have those funds anymore. So it's going to limit to a degree our ability to deliver on our policy plans, but we will deal with that when we bring forward our work program to committee.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Nussbaum, and then Councillor Blais.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that last point, through you, Madam Chair, on the reduction, I guess it was of $745,000 in policy development and urban design, which Mr. Moser explained by saying that there's more focus on TODs and less on CDPs, as far as I understood. Would Mr. Moser have any thoughts on whether or not this reduction is going to impact on the execution of CDPs? So we've already heard, even in this term, a lot of communities express an interest in fulfilling a CDP. Do you expect an impact on the timelines from expression of interest to execution as a result of this reduction? Thank you. That's question number one.
Madam Chair, I think the short answer is yes. I think we're going to have to be very mindful when we bring forward our work program in terms of what we're going to be able to accomplish over this term of council. We have done, we certainly over the last term, we did created a lot of policy, but there's still there is, if you will, a list that we could still go into in terms of some of the not so much the CDPs, because CDPs we use for areas of growth, but we certainly have interest expressed in perhaps looking at some of the older CDPs that we have. We had an example this morning where Mr. Rollins spoke about interested in looking at the existing Sandy Hill plan, which was done many years ago, but we will be limited. I mean, we will have to now devise a program with committee's approval that meets the resources we have to work with.
Okay, thank you. And my second question just relates to, I think it's for Mr. Burry, Madam Chair. I was just looking through the budget documents on page 30 of the Planning Committee, and I just had a very quick question related to the affordable housing line item under the operating resource requirements. And it looks like in 2014 the forecast was $529 million, but only $346 were spent. And I'm just wondering what the cause of that discrepancy was, just to understand for the 2015 context where we were coming
It's
from.
actually the opposite. We budgeted and our forecast is much higher.
So you spent more than you budgeted?
Yes. We got 100% funding in those particular areas.
Sorry?
We get 100% funding to offset those particular areas.
So where did that money come from?
It comes from the IAH program.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Blaine?
Thanks. It's indirectly related to the budget. We've talked about the priority setting a couple times. I'm just wondering what the timeline for that is and if it will take the form that it did last term with the off-site kind of groupthink session.
Madam Chair, it's my understanding that in terms of the council will be looking at strategic initiatives in May, June, and then following that, we would then come and have a discussion on the work program for this committee over the term of this council. So we haven't worked out the details yet, but we did at the beginning of the last term of Planning Committee, we did go off-site and talked about priorities. The Chair and I have spoken about that opportunity as well this time. So we'll be looking to doing that probably end of May, beginning of June to coincide with Council's approval. After Council approves the strategic initiatives, we would then, turn our minds to the work program for the next, by that time, 3.5 years in front of us.
And probably because everybody's schedules are filling up. I know Councillor Vice Chair Tierney has FCM duties, and some of you are going to how many of you are going to FCM? Councillor Nussbaum, I think, Councillor Kluche. So I think, and that is the end of May, 1st of June. So let's firm up a date. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so as I was describing, if we can come back and look at this roadmap again, with the first one being that the Planning Committee, this is moved by Councillor Tierney, the Planning Committee recommends that Council, sitting as Committee of the Whole, approve the Planning Committee 2015 draft operating capital budget as follows. The first one is the Planning and Growth Management, excluding Ontario Building Code budget, as follows. A is user fees. That's pages 10 to 17. We do have the technical amendment that Vice Chair Tierney moved. On the technical amendment, I'll deal with that separately because it is entirely separate. It's fixing it up. Is that carried? Okay. So then, does anyone want to hold pages 10 to 17? And if not, is that carried? Can that be carried? Okay. Then on the operating resource requirement, that's on page 7. And we've had some questions to our general manager on that. Does anyone want to hold that, or can we carry 1B? Carried? Then on the Planning and Development Capital Program, page 38, with the individual projects listed on 39, anyone have questions on that? Is that carried? Thank you. So now we're into Building Code Services. The Ontario Building Code budget as follows. Their user fees are on page 26 to 28. Carried? And the operating resource requirement is on page 23. Is that carried? Okay, and so now we're going to the affordable housing budget as follows. A is the operating resource requirement. That's on page 30. Is that carried? Thank you. And the capital program, page 36, individual project listed on page 37. Is that carried? It is? Good. So therefore, just make sure that the Planning Committee consider the relevant portions of the draft 2015 operating and capital budgets and forward its recommendations to Council, sitting as the whole for consideration at the meeting to be held on Wednesday, March the 11th. Carried? Thank you very much. And thank you to all the people that came out today, and thank you to the staff that have stayed for this. Just make sure. Now, I did move the motion Vice Chair Tierney, to send Councillor Kadri's item to, come and tell me what's upsetting you, Ms. Donnelly. No, we got it. We're good. Okay, we just, when Leslie starts coming towards us, you know that you take that pregnant pause. Because very, very likely, okay, since I'm the only one that could be pregnant here, maybe that's the wrong terminology, but notice of motion? Any notices of motion? How about inquiries? Can I ask everybody, I know that it sounds like we're having a good time up here, but we're not finished yet. Inquiries, any? No? Other business? Okay, we're adjourned, and we'll see you again on Tuesday, March the 10th. Thanks very much, everybody.